Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into muddy boots and scratchy cloaks to trudge our way down the winding roads of medieval Europe. The stars are out, the air smells faintly of damp wool and distant hearth smoke, and the inn is many miles away. You're not a knight or a lord, you're something much humbler, a pilgrim, walking not to battle, but to pray. Or let's be honest, to see some cool relics, maybe snag a miracle, and collect one of those curious little badges everyone's talking about. It's the 14th century, and your village is small, barely more than a handful of wooden cottages nestled beside a church that smells permanently of turnips and incense. You've never gone more than 10 miles from home, and yet today, you're heading out on a pilgrimage. Maybe it's Canterbury, maybe Santiago de Compostela, maybe even Mont Saint-Michel, if your knees hold out. The road stretches ahead, like a wool thread unraveling into the horizon. Of course, you probably won't survive this. Sorry, someone had to say it. Between the robbers, the dysentery, and the distinct possibility of being swindled by a man claiming to sell John the Baptist's actual eyebrow. This is no casual vacation, but you're determined. Maybe you made a vow, maybe someone's sick, or maybe you just need a break from your neighbor's constantly mooing cow. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this sleepy little caravan travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by lacing up your shoes, which is generous language. What you're actually doing is wrapping cloth around your feet and securing it with strips of leather. They're more like proto-socks that threaten to abandon you in every mud puddle. Your satchel contains some bread, a flask, a spare tunic, and a small token from your village priest. No map, no guidebook, just rumors and stories passed from mouth to mouth. Keep the river on your right. Never trust a man with too many teeth, and always sleep with one eye open in the barn. As you walk, you're joined by others. That's part of the charm. Pilgrimage was never a solo sport. You fall into step beside a young woman whose laugh is louder than your common sense, and an older man with a limp who claims to have met St. Cuthbert in a dream. He might also be confusing that with a cheese dream, but who are you to question divine revelation? The road itself is uneven, dirt mostly, ruts deep enough to swallow a small goat. Occasionally, there's a cobbled patch left over from Roman times, just enough to lull you into a false sense of security before a puddle surprises you with its suspicious depth and odor. The air smells of manure, smoke, and occasionally roses when you pass a monastery garden. You're not sure if that's the scent of holiness or just really good compost. You pass shrines, some grand, some just a carved figure in a tree hollow. People stop to pray, to leave coins or trinkets, or to ask for guidance on blisters. At one point, a small boy hands you a pebble and says, "It's lucky." You keep it because that's how folk traditions start. Sometimes someone tells a tale. That old man with the limp, he swears he once saw a pilgrim badge shaped like a lobster. No one believes him, but we all pretend to because it passes the miles. You eat sparingly. Your bread is hard enough to chip a tooth. You soften it in ale, which might be safer than water depending on the day. Sometimes you find a roadside seller offering meat pies. You don't ask what meat, it's better that way. There are hazards too. A group of bandits eye you from a distance, but the sheer smell of your group might be its own defense. Other dangers are less visible: illness, fatigue, and that one guy who keeps snoring during prayer breaks. Still, you march on. Pilgrimage was a strange mix of solemnity and slapstick. One moment, you're reflecting on the mortality of the soul. The next, you're tripping over a chicken that's decided to walk with your group. Everyone's here for different reasons, some out of penance, others for adventure, and a few because they heard the inns near the shrines serve warm wine. Historians still argue whether most pilgrims truly believed in the healing powers of relics or just wanted the prestige of saying they'd made the journey. Likely, it was both. After all, nothing says I'm spiritually committed like walking 300 miles with no modern socks. As the sun dips behind the trees, casting long shadows across the path, you feel a peculiar mix of exhaustion and purpose. The road has started to feel familiar in its unpredictability. You know the rhythm now. Walk, stop, squint at a rock that might be a relic, and avoid stepping in donkey byproduct. Be nightfall, you're tired, your feet throb in time with your heartbeat. But someone starts singing a hymn, off-key but heartfelt. You hum along, and somehow it feels like the start of something important, even if you're not sure what. You settle beside a tree, cloak pulled tight, bread as your pillow. Around you murmurs and snores like incense to the starry sky. You think of the shrine ahead, of the badge you might buy, of the story you'll tell when you return, and just before you drift off, a thought flickers in your mind. Why do we collect things anyway? Trophies, trinkets, talismans. Maybe it's not just about what they show others. Maybe it's what they remind us about ourselves. You wake to the distant clink of pots and the unmistakable sound of someone loudly losing an argument with a mule. Morning on the road is rarely graceful. The air is cold, damp with dew, and your legs have turned into medieval tree stumps overnight. You rise stiffly, nibble at a wedge of cheese that now has its own ecosystem, and set off again. But how do you travel exactly? Not all pilgrims go the same way. Some walk, like you, because they must, or because they believe hardship is part of the holiness. Others ride mules or donkeys if they have the coin to spare. You've seen a few smug types on horseback too, usually minor nobles, or very serious clergy who seem to sweat less than the rest of us. It's possible their clothes are secretly lined with scented herbs. Yours are secretly lined with yesterday's lunch. And then there's river travel. If you're lucky enough to be near one of the major waterways, you might be able to hitch a ride on a barge. Sounds dreamy, right? Gliding lazily downriver, soft breeze, bird song overhead. But then you remember, the river smells like fish stew gone sour. Half the passengers are vomiting from the current, and the other half are shouting about whose turn it is to row. Also, there are eels. So many eels. One tried to slither into someone's boot yesterday. She's still telling the story like it was a demonic visitation. Still, some routes absolutely require water. Take pilgrims to Santiago de Compostela. They often hop from port to port along the Atlantic coast, praying that the sea gods are in a good mood. Sea pilgrimage is its own beast. You don't have to walk, but you do have to contend with storms, pirates, and the constant anxiety that your fellow passengers will mistake seasickness for demonic possession. Again, on foot, things are slower, but more certain. You follow dusty paths etched into the earth by generations of travelers. Pilgrim routes like the Via Francigena, the Camino de Santiago, and England's Pilgrim's Way are real things, arteries of devotion crisscrossing the landscape. Along the way, you pass carved stones with symbols, little wayside chapels, and sometimes helpful signs scratched into trees, or unhelpful ones, like the drawing of a donkey playing a harp you saw yesterday. Still not sure what that was about. You learn quickly that it's not just about choosing how to travel, it's about who you travel with. Walking alone might seem appealing at first. No awkward conversations, no pace adjustments, but it gets lonely fast. And a solo pilgrim is basically a walking coin purse to any opportunistic outlaw. So you join a group. Your group changes daily. One day, it's a quiet trio of nuns whispering psalms. The next, it's 3 tanners who smell like boiled shoes and talk about nothing but liver. Today, you've ended up with a family from Flanders, a disgraced monk who swears he's innocent, and a Welshman with 6 toes, and a song for every mood. Some are devout, others distracted, and at least one guy is definitely only here because his wife told him to go pray about his attitude. Each mode of travel has its quirks. Mules are surprisingly opinionated and will stop walking just to make a point. Boats are unpredictable, offering either serene progress or soggy nightmares. And walking is honest. It's slow enough that you notice the curve of the hills, the way clouds shift over the fields, the smell of wet bark in the woods. You hear your thoughts, and everyone else's too. Along the way, you pass inns, sort of, more like taverns with a side hustle in sleeping strangers. Some charge outrageous prices for a straw mat and suspicious stew. Others let you sleep in exchange for a song, a story, or cleaning out the pig stall. You once did all 3 in the same night. Then there are hostels meant just for pilgrims. Hospices, some call them. These are more reliable, run by monks or nuns, or the occasional kindly widow who just wants someone to eat her pickled radishes. They're often simple stone buildings with long benches, flickering candles, and a thick, comforting silence. If you're lucky, there's a fire. If you're really lucky, there's bread that doesn't chip a molar. Travelers you pass greet you with a nod, sometimes a pax vobiscum, sometimes just a tired, "Don't go that way. There's a cow on the road and she's mean." There are relics of other pilgrims too, carved initials in trees, wooden walking sticks leaning forgotten in ditches, and the occasional broken sandal hanging on a post like a warning, or an offering, or maybe both. The rhythm of the road begins to settle into you, one foot then the other, a low chant in the distance. The far-off bells of a village you won't reach today. Someone in your group hums a tune, off-key but steady. You hum with them. Even your blisters seem to join in. Historians still debate whether most pilgrims truly walked all the way or cheated parts of the journey. Some evidence suggests people bought letters stating they'd walked, even if they hadn't. Others paid stand-ins to go in their place, spiritual outsourcing, if you will. But most people did their best, even if that meant skipping a few soggy miles by hitching a ride on a cart filled with the onions. At the end of this long, aching day, you find yourself beside a fire with your group. Someone has wine, someone else has a dried apple. You share, not because you're especially generous, though you'd like to think you are, but because you've all earned this. Together. You lie on your side in the grass, head resting on your knapsack, Cloak pulled up to your chin, the stars are closer than they've ever seemed. And as your eyes begin to drift closed, you think about how far you've come and how much farther there is to go. You haven't even seen a single badge yet, but you will. Soon. The next morning, you wake before the sun with the gentle ache of someone who now dreams in footstep rhythm. Someone's rooster is already awake and furious, apparently. You stretch, shake out the hay from your cloak, and rejoin the road with your new makeshift family. The six-toed Welshman, the dubious monk, the Flemish family with the suspiciously quiet toddler, and now a cheerful woman named Agnes who's convinced her dog is a reincarnated saint. Nobody argues with her. The dog seems very polite. Today, as you shuffle along a gently winding path flanked by hedgerows and half-interested sheep, someone mentions the shrine you're all heading toward. It sparks a conversation, not the noisy kind, just a sleepy murmuring, like bees over clover. You've heard about the place, of course, a cathedral or an abbey or a simple chapel built around a tomb, the kind of place where miracles allegedly happen if you say the right words or leave the right number of coins. But what really draws people in, aside from the healing water, the relic of Saint whoever's elbow, or the lingering smell of ancient incense, is the chance to prove you were there, to take something home, and that, dear pilgrim, is where the badges come in. Pilgrim badges, small, cheap, made of lead or tin, and shaped into all sorts of strange forms. Scallop shells, swords, saints, shoes, hearts, and yes, occasionally something that might be a lobster. Pilgrims buy them, wear them, treasure them. They're the medieval version of the fridge magnet, only sweatier. Sapf. You haven't seen one yet, not in person, but you've heard the stories. People pin them to their cloaks or hats or bags. They sparkle when the sun hits just right, and they tell everyone who sees you, I went as I walked, I saw the shrine, I made it. And more importantly, my feet are now holy objects. But where did they even come from? That's the question that starts bubbling through your weary mind. You recall that Agnes, dog lady, mentioned that her badge was blessed by a monk who may or may not have been asleep at the time. The six-toed Welshman says his uncle used to make badges in a workshop near a shrine, melting down old spoons and casting them into saint-shaped molds. Apparently, badge making was a real trade. Whole industries popped up near popular shrines, pumping out thousands of tiny lead tokens every year. They'd pour molten metal into carved molds, often using two-sided designs with surprisingly fine detail, and then sell them to pilgrims like you for a few coins. If you're lucky, the badge is recognizable. If not, well, that blob might be St. George, or it might be an overcooked oyster. Some badges were stamped with the name of the shrine, Canterbury, Rome, Compostela, while others were more symbolic, a scallop shell for Santiago, a sword for Thomas Becket, a tiny shoe for the holy footprint of Christ. And they weren't just souvenirs, they were spiritual credentials, proof of penance, portable prayer aids. People believed the badges themselves could hold a sliver of the shrine's holiness, like taking a spark from a sacred fire and pinning it to your cloak. Of course, not everyone believed that. Historians still argue whether the average pilgrim truly saw their badge as a sacred item or just a bragging token to show off at the tavern back home. There's a strong chance it was both. Humans are complicated like that. One moment you're weeping before a saint's relic. The next, you're using the badge as an excuse to cut the beer line. Your group begins spotting pilgrims returning home. dustier, limping, but triumphant. Some have whole capes studded with badges, like jangling medieval armor. You catch a glimpse of a woman with what looks like a tiny sword, a winged boot, and something that might be a frying pan. She walks tall, eyes distant, like she's already telling stories in her mind. You wonder how you'll wear yours, pinned proudly to your cloak, stitched to your bag, secretly hidden in your belt so no one steals it while you sleep. All fair options. And it's not just spiritual power or personal pride at stake. Some people believe the badges themselves carry protective energy. Fall into a river, the badge keeps you afloat. Get sick on the way home, place the badge on your chest. Feel lonely, rub it like a worry stone. Lose your donkey? Okay, that one's probably not in the badge's wheelhouse, but you never know. Badges also serve as proof to skeptical family members that you really did go. Because let's be honest, some folks absolutely lied about making the journey. Just stayed home, worked the fields, maybe had a few ales, and then said, "Yep, I definitely walked to Cologne. Here's my badge." In an age before Instagram, who could dispute it? But most pilgrims don't fake it. They sweat, they limp, they keep walking, because the badge isn't just about the destination, it's about the ordeal. It's about your aching feet, your blistered hands, your 47th bowl of watery pottage. It's about telling your grandkids, "Yes, I went to see the bones of St. Whosawat's, and here's the proof." No, I didn't get eaten by wolves. Stop asking. You feel it already. This strange bond with a thing you haven't even held yet. You picture it, small, slightly misshapen, maybe with a saint's face or a cross or a cryptic Latin phrase that you'll pretend to understand, and it will be yours. The dog lady says her last badge mysteriously disappeared. She's sure the dog ate it. The monk says he once owned a badge shaped like an angel holding a duck. He might be lying, or he might be profoundly blessed. Tonight, you find shelter in a barn offered by a kindly farmer. He gives you an apple, and his goat gives you attitude. You settle into the hay, warm and tired, and your thoughts swirl with lead badges, sacred journeys, and the promise of something small that means something big. You haven't bought one yet, but you're getting closer. You dream of badges, not majestic dreams, mind you, not swooping angels or burning bushes, just a slow, looping image of little metal shapes, scallops and swords and saintly faces, dancing gently above your sleeping head like soft, tinkling wind chimes. As in your dream, you reach out and they disappear. You wake with straw in your hair and the faint taste of goat in the air. Don't ask. Today the road is lined with hedgerows that seem to whisper. The morning fog is stubborn and slow to rise, like a teenager on chore day. Your feet, too, are uncooperative, protesting every step. But the group has picked up a new pilgrim, a Frenchman with a lute and an unplaceable accent. He strums as he walks, humming a tune that may or may not be about cheese. The topic of badges somehow still hangs in the air. Everyone's a little obsessed now. Agnes says her cousin once collected 7 different ones in a single pilgrimage, each from a separate shrine. Apparently there was a badge circuit, like a devotional scavenger hunt. You start noticing other travelers with badges. There's a man with one shaped like a crossbow, which is an odd choice for a religious souvenir. But hey, faith comes in many forms. Another woman wears a neat row of shell-shaped badges stitched to her cloak hem, each one worn smooth from years of wear. You imagine her walking through rain and dust and wind, those tiny metals clinking like prayers. Badges aren't all the same, of course. Some are mass-produced for big shrines, cheap and identical. Others are rarer, possibly handmade. Some shrines only give badges to those who complete a ritual, or kiss the relic, or crawl the final mile on their knees. Others, they'll sell you one in exchange for an onion and a compliment. And yes, badges get lost. They fall off in streams, get buried in the mud, or are quietly regifted to relatives who don't know what they're looking at. In fact, many of the badges we know about today were found centuries later, dug up by farmers plowing fields or kids playing with sticks. Archaeologists sometimes find them miles from any known shrine, suggesting that pilgrims strayed or maybe just got very, very lost. Historians still argue whether some badge designs were meant to be humorous. There's one from Canterbury that depicts Thomas Becket's murder in shocking detail, complete with tiny attackers and one extremely dramatic sword. Goods. Was that really meant to soothe the soul, or were people into very dramatic jewelry back then? You hear stories around the campfire. One man claims a friend once wore so many badges, he jingled like a bell whenever he moved. Another insists he saw a woman whose cloak was so full of them, she had to hire a child to carry it. This may have been an exaggeration, or an extremely niche side hustle. The badge craze even had its critics. Some religious leaders thought pilgrims were focusing too much on trinkets and not enough on spiritual growth. There were sermons scolding people who collected badges like tavern tokens, but people kept buying them anyway, probably because spiritual growth doesn't hang neatly from a hat pin. You pass a small roadside chapel, the kind that looks like a well-fed sheep could knock it over. Inside is a flickering candle and a stone basin filled with cold water. On the wall, a carved niche with 3 tiny weathered badges nestled together like sleeping mice. Someone left them there, an offering, or maybe they just didn't want to carry them anymore. You kneel for a moment, not out of obligation, but because your knees need a break. The chapel smells like damp stone and ancient dust. You trace a shape in the dirt with your finger. You don't realize it at first, but you're sketching a scallop. That's the thing about these badges. They slip into your brain, not in a loud, insistent way, but gently, like a refrain from a lullaby you can't quite place. You begin to wonder, will yours be shiny? Will it catch the light? Will it be shaped like something noble or slightly absurd? There's a legend that one badge, a particularly rare one from a mountain shrine, would glow faintly in the moonlight. Another story says that pilgrims who lost their badge en route had to turn back or risk offending the saint. Probably untrue, but still tempting to believe. Badges were more than just metal. They were portable stories, markers of endurance, and oddly enough, medieval security systems. Some people believed that as long as you wore a badge from a shrine, thieves would leave you alone, not because of fear, but because robbing a pilgrim was considered terrible luck. One story tells of a thief who tried it and was chased by a swarm of bees for 3 days. Possibly coincidence, possibly divine bee vengeance. Some badges were sewn into burial shrouds. Pilgrims who died on the road were often buried in their travel clothes, badges included. People believed that wearing the badge into the afterlife helped the soul travel faster, like a VIP pass for heaven. You pass a woman who offers to sell you a badge early. It's not from your shrine, she says, but it's gently used and mostly sacred. You decline. You want your badge, the one you'll earn. Still, the idea of bootleg badges makes you smile. Even in the 1300s, people were reselling religious merch. That night, your group rests near an abbey. The monks offer stew, legume heavy but warm, and a space in the dormitory. As you drift off on a straw mattress that crunches a bit too much, you hear the lute player softly singing about a pilgrim who traded his boots for a badge shaped like a snail. You think of your future badge. Maybe it will be a shell, maybe a saint, maybe something you can't quite imagine yet. But you know it's waiting somewhere. The sun greets you with the kind of enthusiasm only the sun can have when you've had a fitful night of sleeping next to a monk who snores like a sawmill. The rest of the pilgrims are stirring, some muttering prayers, others muttering about beans. You, however, are already thinking about badges, not just the badge you'll get, but how people wear them. As you walk, you start to notice the placement of badges more than ever before. Some pilgrims pin them proudly to their hats, so they bob like little silver lighthouses with every step. Others sew them onto cloaks or shoulder bags, letting them rattle softly like spiritual wind chimes. You even see one man who has fashioned his into a crude necklace, giving him the look of a medieval rapper, but instead of gold chains, it's holy tin. Wearing a badge isn't just about displaying piety, it's about identity. Every clinking token says, I was there, I endured, I earned this. But it also says something else, something quieter. It tells fellow travelers where you've been, and in a way, who you are. It's your resume, pinned to your tunic. Some pilgrims compete. It's subtle, but real. There's quiet glancing, the not-so-casual side-eye toward that woman with the 5 gleaming badges from 5 different shrines. You don't say anything, but internally you mutter, all right, show off. Agnes whispers that she once met a man who tried to wear 12 badges at once. They eventually formed a kind of metallic poncho, which reportedly got him stuck in a church door. Badges also become icebreakers. You've already had 3 conversations start with, where'd you get that one? Followed by a tale of miraculous healings, near-death river crossings, or suspicious meat pies. They're the medieval equivalent of a travel sticker on your luggage or a mysterious tattoo on your uncle's bicep. And they aren't all serious. You hear of novelty badges sold near certain shrines, like one shaped like a foot, marketed toward pilgrims with particularly swollen ones. One even featured a saint holding a fish, which you're told was either symbolic of baptism or just really big in regions that liked herring. Historians still argue whether that badge was devotional or just delicious. There's even some playful rivalry between shrines. For instance, pilgrims who go to Compostela wear the famous scallop shell, but folks who head to Mont Saint-Michel might wear a tiny tower badge, and there's long been a rumor that they subtly mock each other in passing, not with words, too holy for that, but with smug badge gestures, a tilt of the hat, a purposeful jingle. In some regions, local guilds get involved. Blacksmiths might sponsor badges shaped like hammers. Bakers might prefer loaves or wheat sheaves. You hear of one tailor who had a series of saint badges that he'd sewn into the lining of his coat, one in each pocket, for balance, he claimed. Still, not everyone wears their badges openly. Some keep them hidden, close to the skin. You meet a widow who carries hers in a pouch around her neck. She tells you, quietly, that she doesn't want to use up the blessing by letting it clatter around in the open. That feels oddly right, like wearing your grandmother's ring under gloves. There's also the matter of superstition. Some pilgrims believe that removing your badge before completing the journey breaks the magic. Others believe wearing it on the wrong side, left instead of right, can attract unwanted attention from spirits. One particularly intense German fellow insists that facing your badge toward the setting sun is an open invitation to divine confusion. Naturally, none of this is written down. These are badge rules passed from foot to foot, whispered at campsites, muttered over stew, half believed and half invented, but you still glance down to make sure your future badge spot is properly blessed by elbow sweat. The group takes a short detour today, following a stream that allegedly flows past a small roadside shrine. It's little more than a stone slab under an oak tree, but someone has carved a cross into the trunk and tied colorful bits of cloth to the branches. It's quiet here and oddly peaceful. You notice a few old badges nailed to the tree, rusted now but still faintly gleaming. The Frenchman hums a song as he adds a wildflower to the pile. Agnes lights a tiny candle and rests it in a hollow. The monk, shockingly, says nothing at all. You take a moment to sit, to close your eyes, to imagine what it will feel like to wear your own badge. You think about what you'll say when someone asks, "Where'd you get that?" and you smile. Back on the road, a boy joins your group. He's only about 11 and missing most of his left shoe, but he claims to have 2 badges already, one from Walsingham and one from a well near Lincoln that smells suspiciously of cabbage. He's clearly making at least part of this up, but he's charming and loud and good at spotting blackberries. That night, camped beneath a lopsided starry sky, you finally ask the group the question you've been wondering. Do you think the badge matters more than the journey? The monk pauses mid-spoonful. Agnes looks up from braiding her dog's tail. The Frenchman strums a thoughtful chord. The boy is too busy with a rock. Then the Welshman says, "It's not the badge, it's the blister it covers." You're not sure what that means, but it feels wise. Or maybe your brain is just too tired to argue. Either way, you dream again of badges. This time, one floats gently toward you and settles against your chest, warm and feather-light. You hold it there even as sleep carries you off. You awake to the sound of dew dripping gently from tree leaves and the unmistakable creak of someone trying to quietly stretch a back that has spent one too many nights on uneven ground. A rooster crows in the distance, or maybe that's just the Welshman clearing his throat. Either way, the day has begun. Your thoughts, as ever lately, return to badges, not the ones you wear, but the ones you find, because as it turns out, badges have a habit of turning up in the strangest places. Long after the pilgrim has passed on, and centuries after the roads they walked have changed or disappeared, the badges remain, tucked into riverbanks, buried under fields, caught between the stones of old churchyards. Historians love them, and you would too, if you ever saw one up close. Tiny metal marvels, often made of pewter, lead tin alloy, or sometimes copper, all shaped into saints, crosses, animals, or architectural marvels like cathedrals and bridges. And because they were cheap and made in bulk, they were plentiful, which also meant they were often lost. One theory suggests pilgrims would toss their badge into a river at journey's end as an offering, a sort of thank you to the waters that didn't drown them. Others believe badges were pinned so loosely to cloaks and hats that a strong wind or one good sneeze could send them flying into the mud, never to be seen again. And yet, they are seen again, hundreds of years later. There's a famous story of a farmer in Norfolk who found a badge shaped like a sword-holding saint while digging potatoes. For years, he wore it on his cap for luck. Later, it turned out to be from a now-lost shrine dedicated to a minor Saxon martyr. The sword was bent slightly, which only made it look more heroic. In Belgium, a fisherman once hauled in a net full of river trash, and inside, nestled among the reeds, and a very angry eel, was a scallop badge so well preserved it still had a hint of its original paint. Red and gold, apparently. Very tasteful. Historians still argue whether the widespread presence of these badges in rivers means they were deliberately cast in as part of a ritual, or whether medieval brooch pins were just truly awful at doing their one job. Badge finds are now so common in certain parts of Europe that they've become their own niche of archaeology. There's even a name for them: pilgrim signs, and entire museum drawers filled with them. Some depict famous shrines, others show mythical scenes, and a few remain frustratingly mysterious, like the badge with a goose wearing a halo. No one has quite figured that one out. A sainted goose? A pilgrimage poultry mascot? We may never know. You start paying more attention to where you step. The path is lined with centuries of stories, after all. Perhaps a badge lies beneath the soil, waiting for the right moment to be unearthed. Maybe a relic dropped by someone just like you, tired, hungry, spiritually curious, and trying very hard not to trip over a root. And it's not just religious badges that have been found. Some pilgrims had badges made to commemorate events. A few were political, worn during uprisings or crusades. One badge found near Avignon simply read, "I was there," which is as vague as it is intriguing. There's no record of what there was. Some badges featured moving parts. Tiny hinges allowed certain saint figures to raise their hands in blessing or their heads to tilt dramatically. Historians call these animated badges, but they function more like divine fidget toys. You imagine a bored pilgrim flicking their saint's arm up and down for hours while waiting for the rain to stop. And while many badges were made by specialized craftsmen near major shrines, others were made on the go. Traveling badge makers would set up just outside the city gates, hammering out crude but passable designs with whatever scrap metal they could find. Quality varied. Let's just say not every badge looked like its saintly subject, unless St. James was secretly a weasel with a mustache. Some were personalized, initials etched into the back, little inscriptions like "For Mother" or "God guard me." You wonder what someone would carve into yours. Probably something practical like, "Please don't fall off this time." As your group passes a river crossing, you spot something shiny in the mud. You all pause, hoping just for a moment that it's a lost badge, waiting to be discovered. But no, it's just a particularly aggressive snail. He seems proud of himself, though. "Maybe he swallowed a badge," Agnes whispers. "Maybe he was the badge," the Frenchman adds, strumming something vaguely ominous. The idea sticks with you. In many ways, the badges pilgrims wore were less about decoration and more about memory. Each one a metal snapshot of a place, a moment, a hope. When lost, they became time capsules. When found, they became whispers from the past. Tiny testimonies that someone walked this road, knelt at that shrine, cried in that rainstorm, and made it back home, or didn't. You glance at the badge spot on your tunic again. Still empty, still waiting, but you carry the shape of it in your mind, the way it will feel when it's pinned there, cool against your chest, the little weight of it, solid, earned, it'll be yours, and if it ever gets lost, maybe someone centuries from now will find it, lift it from the soil, and wonder who you were, and maybe, just maybe, they'll smile. You're still thinking about that imaginary snail badge hours later as you trudge along a sun-dappled trail. The path narrows here, hemmed in by hedgerows thick with buzzing insects and the occasional suspicious rustle. At one point, a pheasant erupts from a bush with the energy of a cannonball, and you nearly trip over your own feet. The monk calls it a divine warning. Agnes thinks the pheasant just didn't like your hat. Whatever the case, you're wide awake now, which is helpful because today the conversation turns toward the people who made the badges, the craftsmen, the smiths, the miracle salesmen with anvils and holy tin. Badge making was a booming little trade, especially in towns that attracted large numbers of pilgrims. These artisans, often called pilgrim signers or just makers, set up shop close to shrines, in marketplaces, and near the gates where exhausted pilgrims stumbled in, wallets light and hearts full. Their workshops were surprisingly efficient. Pewter, made from a mix of tin and lead, was melted down and poured into molds carved with saintly images or shrine symbols. Some molds could churn out dozens at once. Think of it as the medieval version of a vending machine, only a bit sweatier and far more reliant on open flame. You pass through one such town around midday. The air smells of iron and onion soup. In a small square, there's a stall where someone is still selling commemorative tokens, though these days they're mass-produced from aluminum and come with a keychain. You can't help but wonder how different it really is. Back in the day, these craftsmen weren't always locals. Some were itinerant, following the ebb and flow of pilgrimage seasons like holy surfers. They'd arrive, set up temporary forges, sell a few hundred badges in a week, and vanish with their earnings, often spent on beer, bread, and very questionable dental care. Some badge makers were women, not many, but enough to cause comment. There's one record of a widow in Paris who took over her husband's mold collection and ran the business for over a decade. She reportedly added little flourishes, tiny hearts, filigreed edges that made her badges especially popular with young pilgrims trying to impress each other. Romance and relics, a classic combo, the quality varied wildly. Reputable makers produced crisp, symmetrical designs, saints with clearly defined halos, shrines that looked like actual buildings. Less reputable ones offered badges that appeared to feature melting animals, or what may or may not have been a fish with legs. Historians still argue whether these were creative interpretations or just bad days at the forge. You stop at a roadside inn for water and shade. On the wall hangs a framed collection of replica badges. One shows St. Catherine holding her wheel. Another depicts a little chapel with smoke curling out of a chimney, either symbolic holiness or poor ventilation. The barkeep says his grandfather collected them. You wonder aloud how many pilgrims passed this way before you. He smiles and says, "Enough to wear down the floorboards." Badge makers also had a flair for marketing. They'd shout their wares with slogans like, "Blessing in your pocket," or "Take home a piece of salvation." Some even swore their badges had healing powers, especially if dipped in the shrine's holy water. One ambitious vendor reportedly claimed his badges could cure gout, insomnia, and unpleasant neighbors. 3 out of 3 still incurable. You wonder if modern souvenirs lost a bit of that charm. Sure, A fridge magnet doesn't promise miracles, but it also doesn't contain lead, so perhaps that's progress. Back on the road, the group discusses favorite badge shapes. The boy votes for animals. He's especially fond of a story involving a lion-shaped badge worn by a knight who swore it roared during storms. Agnes prefers the simple scallop shell. The Frenchman favors architectural designs, tiny castles, and cathedrals. You say you'd like one shaped like a boot. For honesty, you explain, that's what really got me here. The monk doesn't speak, but later he shows you a folded bit of cloth. Inside is a very old, very worn badge, a tarnished depiction of Saint Christopher, patron saint of travelers. He says nothing, just presses it gently into your hand for a moment, then takes it back and returns to humming. Some badge makers also dabbled in politics. During times of unrest, certain designs carried coded messages. A saint holding a scale might hint at justice or reform. A cross with broken arms could signify resistance. Pilgrims who wore these designs weren't just religious. They were making quiet statements, walking declarations in pewter. And then there were the fakes. Yes, counterfeit badges were a thing. Unscrupulous vendors would copy popular shrine badges and sell them miles from the original site. Sometimes they'd exaggerate the miracle, claim it cured plague, blindness, and unruly hair. Others made up saints entirely. There's one record of a badge showing Saint Harold the Happy, who never existed but sold remarkably well in taverns. The church eventually cracked down, but enforcement was tricky. Who could say what made a badge authentic, especially when the original mold was just a block of lead in a smoky tent? And so the fakes persisted. Badges with extra arms, duplicate saints, or inscriptions so poorly stamped they became abstract art. Still, pilgrims didn't always mind. A badge was a badge, and if it caught the light just right, it made you feel closer to the divine, or at least to your destination. The sun is sinking now. Shadows stretch across the road like sleepy cats. The group begins scouting for a place to camp, somewhere flat, somewhere quiet, somewhere preferably not filled with nettles or owls who perform nightly concerts. As you set down your pack and stretch your aching legs, you think again about all those anonymous badge makers, hunched over their fires, molding bits of metal into hope, and you realize something odd. Every badge, no matter how crooked or cracked or poorly stamped, carried a piece of someone's belief. It wasn't just about the image, it was about the intention behind it. The journey, the sweat, the aching feet, the whispered prayers. That badge you'll eventually wear, it won't just be yours. It will belong to everyone who helped make the road. The stars come out slowly that night. First a faint sparkle above the trees, then a slow curtain of light across the heavens. You're lying on your back, staring up, too tired to sleep just yet. The air smells faintly of lavender and wood smoke. Somewhere, a donkey is snoring. In the quiet, your thoughts drift again, this time to the question everyone always asks sooner or later on these journeys. Why are you really doing this? And behind that, why did they do it? The thousands of people who walked these paths centuries before you, collecting badges as they went, pausing at shrines and hoping for something to shift inside them. Pilgrimages weren't just for piety, not always. People had their reasons, some noble, some less so, all deeply human. There were, of course, the classic motivations: devotion, repentance, and the hope of healing. Shrines dedicated to miracle-working saints were often associated with specific ailments. You'd go to one for eye problems, another for fevers, yet another for foot sores, though one suspects the walk itself didn't help much with that last one. Then there were the desperate, a woman whose child wouldn't stop crying, a man who'd lost his trade after a freak hailstorm, a whole village that decided their well had been cursed after it started tasting like onions. People came with their worries tucked under their cloaks and hopes tied to their walking sticks. Some were sent on pilgrimage as punishment. Imagine being caught stealing bread, and instead of jail time, the magistrate says, "Off you go to Santiago, and no dawdling." They'd arrive at shrines not necessarily feeling holy, but definitely feeling exhausted, and maybe that was half the point. Others went for status. If you returned from a long pilgrimage, especially one to Rome or Jerusalem, you earned respect, a new social standing. Some even added the pilgrimage destination to their name, John of Compostela, Mary of Canterbury, as though it were a degree. Ah, yes, I graduated in blisters with a minor in miraculous waters. Historians still argue whether the majority of medieval pilgrims were deeply devout or simply practical. Did they walk because they believed, or because it seemed like the best option when the harvest failed and their cousin borrowed their last coin? Likely it was both. Some walked out of grief, others for joy. Some went just to see the world in the one socially acceptable way that didn't mark you as a troublemaker or a bard with gambling debts. And a few, just a few, went because someone dared them. You hear the rustle of a blanket beside you. Agnes has rolled over, murmuring something about figs and dragons, probably a dream, or possibly a reference to that one unpleasant stew from last week. Still, she's not wrong. Dragons were involved in more than a few pilgrimages, or at least dragon legends were. Some shrines were dedicated to saints who'd slain dragons, and pilgrims came hoping to be protected from metaphoric dragons of their own. Illness, fear, bad neighbors, the vague threat of eternal damnation. One man, according to a very dubious 13th century letter, walked from northern France to Rome to become a better husband and escape his mother-in-law's parsnip pie. You admire the honesty. Badges became part of this storytelling. You could tell a lot about someone by the badge they wore, not just where they'd been, but who they hoped to be. There's an account of a young woman in Flanders who wore a badge from the shrine of Saint Dymphna, patron of mental illness, alongside a badge from Saint Catherine, the intellectual's saint. When asked why, she reportedly replied, "For my mind and for my mother." A humble little sentence carrying years of pain and hope in it. And let's not forget the merchants. Pilgrimage routes doubled as trade routes. Inns, markets, and shrines all became places to sell goods, from candles and holy water flasks to gingerbread shaped like saints. Some pilgrims, knowingly or not, became walking advertisements. You imagine someone arriving home and saying, "Yes, the trip was long, the relics were glowing, but have you tried those candied almonds from that tiny village near Limoges?" Even the clergy got involved. Some abbots encouraged pilgrimage, hoping for donations. Others discouraged it, worried that their flock would come back with strange ideas, new habits, or worst of all, songs that involved too much dancing. You feel a breeze roll over the camp, cool and sweet-smelling. The stars have shifted, a soft snore emerges from the monk's side of the fire. You wonder what he dreams about. Saintly debates, heavenly choir auditions. Somewhere deeper in the trees, an owl hoots, possibly at you. You curl into your blanket, the earth surprisingly comfortable beneath you. A thought bubbles up. Is this the real pilgrimage? Not the shrines or the badges or the promises, but these moments in between, the stories, the dust, the company, the strange meals, and the even stranger conversations. Maybe that's why they did it, not just to arrive somewhere sacred, but to remember who they were along the way, and to come home with a badge that said, not just I went, but I changed. You shift slightly, the blanket tangled at your feet. A faint glimmer of silver catches your eye near the edge of your pack, probably a coin, or a buckle, or, if you're extremely lucky, a small, oddly shaped badge that somehow escaped notice until now. You don't reach for it, not yet. The journey's not over, and sometimes the best souvenirs wait until the morning. The morning mist curls low across the path, weaving between your legs like a nosy cat as you step quietly over damp stones. Someone ahead sneezes into the hush, and you hear the Frenchman curse softly about weather that tastes like soup. You agree, it does feel like walking through someone's breath. You're still thinking about badges, though. You've noticed something curious. Nearly every village you pass through has its own unique design. A fish curled around a cross, a weeping tree, a crowned hand. Some are obvious references, others are more cryptic. One badge you saw yesterday featured what looked like a pig riding a barrel. No one could explain it, but everyone agreed it was quite popular last Lent. This leg of the journey is bumpier than usual, both underfoot and emotionally. The monk seems troubled. He's praying more often and pacing in little circles during breaks. Agnes has stopped singing, and the boy with the freckles has developed a new fascination with worms, which he holds up proudly like tiny, squirming trophies. You're beginning to suspect he's just bored of saints. The road passes a crumbling wall, and beyond it you spot a tiny chapel, or what's left of one. Roof gone, vines scaling the stone like it's a race, but the doorframe still stands, and beside it, almost hidden in the ivy, is a wooden board with dozens of tiny holes. Upon closer inspection, you realize they once held pilgrim badges, hammered into the wood with tiny pins or nails. You step closer, peering at the rusted fragments. A few still hang on. A broken staff here, half a lamb there, a scallop shell worn smooth by rain. It's a shrine of sorts, a badge graveyard, a memory board for those who once stopped here and moved on. You wonder what compelled someone to leave their badge behind, deliberately. That too was a tradition. Some pilgrims offered their badges to shrines as a form of thanksgiving. I made it, the gesture seemed to say. Keep this as proof. Others left them to ask for continued protection, or because they believed the badge, having completed the pilgrimage, had absorbed some divine power and needed to rest. And then there were those who simply couldn't carry the weight anymore, literal or emotional. Removing the badge could be symbolic of letting go, moving forward, or finally forgiving someone who'd never deserved it. One medieval account tells of a woman who reached the shrine of St. Thomas and immediately removed every badge she'd worn, 5 in total. She left them behind, knelt for an hour, and then walked away in silence. Her story was never recorded, only the act remains. Historians still argue whether these ritual removals thus were encouraged by the church or frowned upon. Some records suggest they were considered pious offerings. Others imply they were seen as unnecessary littering. The truth probably lies somewhere between reverence and I forgot it on the bench. You move on, following the others down into a narrow valley. It's warmer here, the path flanked by apple trees and the odd goat. A man with a lute nods as you pass. He's playing a tune you don't recognize, but your feet fall into rhythm with it anyway. Badge removal wasn't always voluntary. There are stories, some real, some embroidered with time, of pilgrims being robbed, their badges taken and sold to travelers too lazy or busy to make the actual journey. Pilgrim badges became a black market item in some areas. You could buy a Compostela badge in Bruges, a Canterbury badge in Cologne. It diluted the meaning for some. For others, it was just efficient. And then there's the story of the man who wore over 100 badges at once, sewn onto a thick leather jerkin like some holy version of medieval chainmail. He allegedly made a career of walking pilgrimage routes and offering prayers in exchange for meals. A wearable resume. Pilgrims whispered that you could hear him coming before you saw him, metal jingling like wind chimes in a storm. Was he a fraud, a saint, or just a man who liked the attention? It's a question that floats through many pilgrimage records. Some wore badges to impress, others wore them to believe. By noon, your feet are arguing with the rest of your body, but lunch arrives in the form of a quiet village square. There's bread and soft cheese, and a woman selling soup out of a cauldron that could double as a modest bathtub. You eat gratefully, watching locals pass by, none of them in a hurry. One elderly man sits near your group and taps the monk's shoulder. They exchange words in Latin, hands gesturing toward the hilltop church, just visible above the rooftops. Eventually, the monk stands, gestures for you all to follow. You ascend a winding path to find a chapel, tiny but lovingly maintained. Inside, candlelight flickers. On the wall behind the altar is an enormous carved frame filled with old badges, dozens of them, hundreds, shapes of saints, crosses, dragons, churches, hands, boats, animals, tears, each one mounted carefully, labeled in delicate script, Pilgrim 1389, unknown, found in wall, gift of the shoemaker's wife. You stand quietly, the scent of wax and dust surrounding you. Agnes takes off her own badge, a simple one with a tower on it, and places it in the basket below the frame. She doesn't say why. She doesn't have to. Not every badge is meant to be worn forever. Some are meant to be left behind. The monk lights a candle. The boy with the worms says nothing, but stands a little straighter. The Frenchman mutters something about onions and wipes his eyes suspiciously. You linger, not out of obligation, but reverence. Then you step back into the light. The road still stretches far ahead, but now there's a little more room in your pack, and maybe a little more in your heart. The path levels out into a dusty plain by mid-afternoon, the kind where your footsteps puff up tiny clouds with each stride, and every horizon looks like a mirage. It's the kind of stretch that tests a pilgrim's patience more than their faith. The monk begins humming to himself, something in a minor key that may or may not be a hymn. You fall into step beside Agnes, who is still badgeless after the chapel. She shrugs when you ask her about it. Felt like the right time, she says. Besides, I've still got my freckles. As you walk, a new thought drifts in. How were these badges made in the first place? They were small, yes, but no two seemed exactly alike. Some had astonishing detail. Tiny faces, little inscriptions, almost like medals. Others looked as though someone sneezed while pouring the mold. Pilgrim badges were typically crafted from lead-tin alloy, a material that was cheap, malleable, and best of all, plentiful. The process was fairly straightforward by medieval standards. Molds were carved from stone, slate, or cut into metal sheets. Molten alloy was poured in, cooled, and then the pieces were clipped out and trimmed. You imagine a tiny, soot-streaked workshop behind a shrine, someone hunched over a fire, carefully pouring liquid metal into narrow molds, while their apprentice fans the coals with a goat bladder. Some badges were made in bulk. Shrines with large pilgrim traffic needed a steady supply. The badge market was bustling. Sometimes stalls popped up right outside the church doors. Others operated more, let's say unofficially. One bishop complained that badges were being hawked like onions, with about as much piety. Historians still argue whether pilgrims preferred locally made badges or brought their own molds. Some archaeologists suggest that traveling smiths followed the pilgrimage routes, setting up temporary shops and engraving badges on commission. A souvenir with your name on it. You imagine the pitch, only 3 pence extra if you want the saint holding a dog. And yes, there were fashion trends. In the 14th century, badges with moving parts were suddenly all the rage. Little arms that waved, legs that danced, miniature windmills that actually turned in the breeze. They weren't exactly subtle, but then again, subtlety wasn't a major concern when you were trying to signal your saintly devotion and your sense of style. Some wore their badges pinned to hats. Others lined their cloaks with them like a knight's coat of arms. There are accounts of women weaving them into veils and of men attaching them to belts, staff handles, or even their shoes. One could say, a literal step in the direction of holiness. Then there were those who collected without ever wearing, hidden collections, keepsake boxes. One woman's grave in England revealed a set of 4 pristine badges tucked inside a pouch beneath her ribs. Perhaps she wore them, or perhaps they were tucked away, like childhood mementos, each holding its own memory. You hear a soft grunt and look back to see the Frenchman holding up a particularly shiny badge he's just traded for at a roadside stall. It's shaped like a little fish speared through with a thorn, the symbol of some local martyr you've never heard of. Very fashionable, he says, also probably cursed. You ask what he traded for it. He grins. 3 dried pears and a wink. The badge trade was real and robust. Not everyone could afford to make the full journey to a famous shrine. But badges, those were attainable, even aspirational. Owning one connected you to the spiritual benefits of the pilgrimage, even if you never left your village. The badge was a fragment of the path, an indulgence in metal. Naturally, the church had mixed feelings about this. Some clergy encouraged badge use, others frowned at the growing obsession with them, arguing that people were more interested in collecting tokens than actual spiritual growth. You imagine a priest sighing deeply as a pilgrim shuffles forward and asks if they might receive just the badge and a quick prayer, please. One bishop even tried to outlaw all badge production in his diocese, claiming they were a distraction and a vanity. The local economy promptly collapsed. The bishop was reassigned to a quieter post, somewhere very badge-free. There's a brief pause in the afternoon heat when the group stops to rest under a tree. A young boy, you don't recognize him, probably from another group, sits nearby with a strip of cloth spread across his knees. On it are 5 tiny badges. He's pressing them gently into the cloth, making faint outlines in the dust. His father, a tall man with a bent nose and a pilgrim's sunburn, sits beside him. That one's from St. Leonard, he says, pointing to the first. He helps with prisoners and your granddad. The boy nods solemnly. It's a reminder. These weren't just souvenirs. They were stories. Worn on the body, passed between generations, hidden in attics, lost in rivers, and now dug up centuries later by archaeologists squinting into the soil like bedtime detectives. Badges have been found in the unlikeliest of places: sewage pits, castle moats, even the Thames. One researcher discovered a badge of the Virgin Mary tangled in the roots of an elm tree, miles from any known shrine. No one knows how it got there. Theories range from accidental loss to ritual burial to one particularly clumsy squirrel. And in a way, each lost badge is its own little mystery. Who wore it? Why? What did they believe? Or hope? Or fear? The badge tells part of the story, but only part. The rest is left to soft speculation and the kind of wondering best done at twilight, when the road is still warm underfoot and the air smells like time and memory. You look down at your own badge, a simple design, a tower like Agnes's. You brush a thumb across it, then tuck it back into the fold of your cloak. The sun begins to tilt low. The Frenchman is whistling. The monk is praying under his breath. And the road, always waiting, curls onward like a ribbon into the next forgotten village. You adjust your pack and walk. The next village emerges like a dream, or maybe a mirage you've collectively decided to believe in. A cluster of timber-framed houses, their whitewash gently glowing in the golden hour light, with smoke curling lazily from a few chimneys. You're not entirely sure what day it is, or even which kingdom you're in at this point, but the smell of something baking is universal. As your group shuffles into the square, children scatter like starlings. One girl stays, though. She's about 8, barefoot, and chewing a piece of grass with a kind of stern authority. Around her neck hangs a string of, yes, those are pilgrim badges, at least 7, jumbled like charms. She meets your gaze, squints, and says in a voice far older than her body, "You want a room? Go to Marta's, but don't eat her porridge." You nod solemnly and make a mental note about the porridge. Inside Marta's house, part inn, part stable, part gossip headquarters, you find a long wooden bench and a pewter mug of something warm and faintly herbal pressed into your hands. The monk gives thanks. The Frenchman asks if there's wine. Agnes immediately falls asleep, with her head on the table. As you sip, your eyes drift to a display on the wall. More badges, this time arranged in the shape of a fish, a local pattern maybe, or just a creative way to show off. And that's when the hostess, Marta, you presume, settles down beside you and starts talking. "You know," she says, "there are badges for everything now. Lost a cow? There's a saint for that. Bitten by a goose? Saint Medard. Stubbed your toe on the altar steps? Saint Elmo might care." She's joking, probably, but only just. In the late medieval period, the badge industry truly blossomed into a chaotic, lovable sprawl. No longer limited to major pilgrimage sites, badges began to pop up in connection with specific miracles, events, even relics of dubious origin. Take, for example, the milk of the Virgin Mary. Yes, you heard that right. Several European shrines claimed to possess tiny vials of Mary's breast milk, carefully preserved and displayed for the devout, or at least the deeply curious. Badges from these shrines often depicted a stylized breast with a stream arching into a chalice. Subtlety, a distant concern. Historians still argue whether these niche badges were genuinely believed in or mostly purchased for amusement. Some pilgrims likely took them very seriously. Others probably saw them as collector's items or as a cheeky gift for that cousin with a sense of humor. And then there were the miracle badges. These weren't always tied to saints, but instead to specific events. a well that suddenly ran with wine, a statue that wept, or a piece of bread that allegedly sang the Ave Maria before turning moldy. Badges commemorated these miracles. Limited runs, naturally. Only the lucky few pilgrims who arrived before the bread got eaten could snag one. That scarcity made them even more desirable. The Frenchman joins you on the bench, clearly having finished his second mug of soup. He sets down a new badge he's just bought from Marta, a little angel holding a fish. It's from a river miracle, he says, or possibly just dinner. Across the room, a merchant begins recounting tales of a badge he once saw, shaped like a tooth with wings. Another man swears he heard of one featuring a dancing bishop with tiny movable legs. You suspect that badge may have involved more wine than liturgy. By the fire, an old woman pulls out a small leather pouch and opens it to reveal 4 perfectly preserved badges, each with a backstory longer than a sermon. One belonged to her brother, another to a lover who went on pilgrimage and never returned. The third, she says, came from a shrine that burned down a decade ago. The last, she just liked the color. You start to see that these badges weren't just tokens of place. They were repositories of memory, of identity, of drama, mistakes, prayers, and purchases. The monk contributes his own tale, soft and slow. I once met a man who wore a badge in the shape of a boot. He said it reminded him not to stray too far from the path. Every time he looked at it, he remembered a wrong turn. And a kindness? He doesn't elaborate. No one asks. Outside, the sun finishes setting. With a kind of exhausted sigh, candlelight replaces it, warm and flickering. Marta brings out bread and cheese, and you all eat like it's the first meal of your lives. Later, stretched out on straw mattresses, the talk drifts quieter. Someone mentions a badge shaped like a duck riding a donkey. You're too sleepy to decide if it was real or part of a dream. But before you fall asleep, you wonder, what kind of badge would you make? Would it show a path, a star, a cup of soup with a spoon that's slightly too long? Would anyone understand it? Or maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe the point of the badge isn't what it looks like. Maybe it's what it reminds you of. A moment, a place, a person who shared a crust of bread, a night when the road was kind and you didn't feel alone, the candle gutters. You roll onto your side, and the road, though paused, waits patiently in the dark. You wake to the sound of soft bells, not church bells, but the kind tied to a goat's collar, somewhere just outside the window. The light filtering through the wooden shutters is gentle, like someone forgot to turn up the brightness on the day. You stretch, joints cracking in a quiet symphony of sore muscles and straw mat regret. The Frenchman is already gone, so is the monk. Only Agnes remains, still wrapped in her cloak like a burrito of devotion, snoring faintly. Her boots are on the wrong feet again. You step outside into the cool morning. The village square is still save for a woman sweeping dust into different piles, presumably in an effort to confuse it. The goat gives you a solemn nod as you pass. Soon enough, your group regathers, and the road calls, insistently, like a friend who always shows up a bit too early for dinner. You set off once more, and today's leg of the journey leads you toward a major crossroads, where the paths of several pilgrimages overlap, and with it, a new kind of excitement, the badge fair. These fairs weren't exactly scheduled with the precision of modern conventions, but as pilgrim routes grew more popular, certain intersections became regular gathering spots. Badges were bought, sold, traded, compared, critiqued, and occasionally stolen. You arrive at the fair by midday. It's a glorious mess. Tents lean drunkenly in every direction. Merchants bark slogans that would make your parish priest wince. A boy walks past wearing what appears to be an entire saint's shrine on his hat. You pass one stall selling rare badges that all look suspiciously alike, and another selling humorous ones. A saint laughing, a bishop tripping, a small angel holding up a sign that says, "Oops." Historians still argue whether these funny badges were allowed or just tolerated. Officially, the church frowned on anything that mocked sacred imagery. Unofficially, no one wants to argue with a man who's just walked 300 miles with 2 blisters and a broken sandal strap. At one booth, a toothless woman waves you over and offers a badge shaped like a fish with legs. St. Christopher's pet, she claims. You raise an eyebrow, she winks. Or possibly just dinner again. You begin to notice how pilgrims cluster in little groups, comparing badges the way modern travelers compare passport stamps or concert shirts. One man boasts of his 3 Jerusalem collection, though a nearby nun snorts and says Jerusalem's badges are never that shiny. Fake, she mutters, probably made in Lion. Badge envy was a real thing, it turns out. Pilgrims who couldn't travel far sometimes went out of their way to collect the most exotic-looking badges, hoping to fool their neighbors into thinking they'd braved sea monsters and Saracens. One bishop even complained that some pilgrims were commissioning custom badges to pretend they'd visited shrines that didn't exist. He called it piety cosplay, though not in so many words. You spot a badge shaped like a foot, with a bandage wrapped around it. The vendor tells you it's for Saint Roch, patron of plague survivors, skin diseases, and conveniently sore feet. You nearly buy it on principle. Nearby, a young couple is buying a pair of matching badges shaped like hearts pierced by arrows. "It's romantic," the woman says. "It's tacky," the man replies. They buy them anyway. You realize badges weren't just about saints and miracles. They were love tokens, fashion statements, and inside jokes, a silent language spoken in lead and pewter. One boy offers to trade his badge, shaped like a tiny castle, for your tower badge. "Mine has a moat," he says proudly. "It leaks, but still." You decline politely. You've grown a bit fond of your tower. It's slightly crooked, and the windows are mismatched, but that just makes it feel more honest. Like you, really. As you move deeper into the fair, you come upon a tent with banners advertising personal pilgrimage consultation and badge matching. Intrigued, you enter. Inside, an elderly woman sits cross-legged, surrounded by boxes of badges. She looks at you for a long moment, then gestures for you to sit. "Let's see," she murmurs, pulling out a badge shaped like a scallop shell, then one that looks like a dog licking a wound, and finally, a simple cross with a tree beside it. She squints at you again. "You're a walker," she says, "not just a traveler." You listen to the road. You nod, unsure whether to feel flattered or worried. She hands you the cross and tree badge. "For patience," she says, "and for not getting lost in the wrong stories." You thank her. The badge feels warm in your hand, though that may just be the sun. Before leaving, you spot a display near the exit, a large wooden board covered in donated badges, some old, some new, some broken. A sign above it reads, "For those who couldn't finish." You stare at it for a while, then you see Agnes nearby, placing one of her extra badges on the board. "For my cousin," she says softly. "He started this trip, didn't make it past spring." You offer her a quiet nod. She shrugs, wipes her nose, and mutters something about dust. By late afternoon, the badge fair begins to wind down. Vendors pack up their wares. Pilgrims exchange last-minute trades. Someone starts a song you half know, and others join in, off-key but content. The road waits just beyond the edge of the fair, a familiar curve in the land. You shoulder your bag, tuck your new badge into your cloak, and rejoin your group. As you walk, you glance back at the tents one last time. They're already fading into the heat shimmer, like a vision, bright, strange, and oddly comforting. Not everything on this path is about hardship, you realize. Some of it is about joy, about collecting pieces of the world, one silly badge at a time. You follow the road until the fair disappears behind a hill, replaced by quiet fields and the distant silhouette of a crumbling watchtower, probably Roman, definitely tilted. Your group walks in easy silence now, each person a little heavier, with badges and stories. The monk hums softly, the Frenchman twirls a stick like it's a sword, and Agnes is teaching a local dog to heel using bits of yesterday's bread. The dog isn't impressed, but he's also not leaving. By dusk, you arrive at a small shrine built around a spring bubbling from beneath a tree. Pilgrims kneel, splash their faces, fill wooden flasks. You sit on a mossy stone and trace the edge of your newest badge, the cross and tree, feeling the warm metal press into your palm. A traveling friar, seated nearby, notices your gaze. That tree, he says, nodding at the shrine. They say it sprouted on the same night the local priest dreamt of Saint Martin shaking water from his cloak. You squint, that sounds damp. He chuckles. Well, it's the damp that heals. Miracle springs like this one were all over medieval Europe. Some were said to cure rashes, others blindness. One particular well in England was said to rid you of shyness, though it mostly smelled like turnips. This spring, it's famous for curing foot blisters. You consider dunking your entire leg. Nearby, someone has strung up badges in the branches of the tree, an offering, perhaps, or just decoration. There's a fish, a crown, a spiral, and what appears to be a goat riding a wheelbarrow. You don't ask. As you're admiring the collection, the Frenchman appears, gesturing with dramatic flair. Have you seen the badge tree? He says, as though discovering it for the first time. I shall add mine. He dramatically ties a badge to a low branch. It's shaped like a key. For unlocking the next leg of our journey, he declares. You nod solemnly, though you suspect he mostly chose it because it was shiny. By the fire that evening, conversation turns to the purpose of badges. Not just the where or the how, but the why. Why do people keep collecting them? Even when they're heavy, even when they fall off, even when they mean nothing to the next town over? Historians still debate whether medieval pilgrims truly believed their badges held protective power, or whether they were just souvenirs. Some badges were definitely believed to hold blessings. People dipped them in holy water, kissed them before sleep, even used them as makeshift amulets during storms. Others, like the ones left in trees or hung around shrines, might have been acts of symbolic closure, a way of saying, "Thank you, I made it this far." There's even record of badges being melted down and mixed into bells or chalices. Imagine sipping from a cup infused with 24 saints' journeys. That's either deeply holy or deeply concerning, depending on the metallurgy. One badge, found centuries later in a farmer's field, bore no image at all, just a worn, smoothed-out surface. No one could tell what shrine it was from. Some said it must have belonged to someone who didn't finish their pilgrimage. Others insisted that a blank badge was the most honest of all, a silent marker for a journey still in progress. Oh, you lean back and gaze at the stars. They don't form a recognizable constellation, not unless you squint and pretend 3 of them are St. Anthony holding a lantern. But it's enough. The monk clears his throat and tells a quiet story about a woman who wore over 20 badges sewn into the lining of her cloak, not to display, but to keep close, hidden against her skin. She said they were prayers she was too tired to say out loud. Agnes adds a tale of a badge shaped like a ladder, given to her by a stranger in exchange for a cup of broth. For climbing back up, the woman had said, when you fall into thinking you're the only one who's lost. It's hard to tell whether she's joking. Probably not. You reach into your pouch and run your fingers over your own badges. Each has a little weight to it, not just the metal, but the memory, the hill you climbed, the song someone sang, the night you thought you wouldn't go on and did anyway. The fire pops softly. The dog curls up beside you. In the quiet, you wonder what stories your badges would tell, if they could talk. Not grand ones, maybe, but real, honest, a little bit strange. The Frenchman is snoring again, this time flat on his back, hands folded like a dramatic corpse. The monk quietly places a leaf over his mouth. You pretend not to laugh. The stars blink on and off like tired eyes. You drift, and your dreams are full of tiny metal shapes, spinning, clinking, forming patterns only half visible. They float through forests, rise out of springs, and whisper prayers in languages you only understand in sleep. You wake to the sound of a cartwheel creaking and someone swearing softly in Latin. The monk, it turns out, has somehow convinced a passing farmer to give your group a lift, for a short while at least. His payment, a handful of dried figs and a badge shaped like a spoon. Symbolic, the monk says mysteriously, climbing aboard. Or maybe I just like spoons. The cart smells like old hay and something faintly vinegar-like, but it beats walking for now. As the ox trudges forward, the landscape opens up into long, rippling fields dotted with distant chapels and stands of wild lavender. You ride in silence for a while, listening to the crunch of wheels, the occasional grunt of the ox, and the Frenchman's theatrical sighs. He claims to be developing a blister in his spirit. Eventually, the farmer drops you off near a larger town, the kind where buildings lean together like gossiping old women, and the main square is lined with inns, butchers, and what appears to be a stand selling guaranteed relic dust. It's market day, and with it comes a new kind of badge commerce. Here, in the relative bustle of town life, badges aren't just religious symbols, they're currency. A badge from Santiago might be traded for a hot meal. One from Canterbury could shave a few coins off your room rate. More than a few innkeepers quietly admit to favoring pilgrims with the good badges, meaning those from prestigious or faraway shrines. One stall proudly displays a painted sign, "We buy, sell, melt, and bless." Underneath are piles of badges stacked like poker chips, gleaming in the sun. A wiry woman with half-moon glasses beckons you closer. "Show me what you've got," she says, and you find yourself opening your pouch without much resistance. She examines each badge like a jeweler, inspecting gems. A crooked tower, modest but honest, a scallop, always popular, and, a crossin' tree, from the well at St. Martin's Spring, yes? You nod, surprised she knew. Very healing, very rare. I'll give you 3 goose pies and a pickled onion for it. You decline politely, so though the onion sounds tempting, historians still argue how widespread this badge as currency practice really was. Some evidence suggests it was localized to larger towns with steady pilgrim traffic, while other sources claim entire black markets of badge-based bartering existed, complete with fakes, forgeries, and limited editions. Some badge makers even engraved tiny initials on the back, a medieval version of branding. Others embedded small splinters of wood or cloth, claiming they came from the shrine itself, though one infamous scandal in Cologne revealed that a popular batch of relic-infused badges had been filled with sawdust and cabbage stem. You overhear a conversation between a group of townsfolk. One proudly describes his uncle's badge chest, a literal wooden box kept by the family, filled with generations of pilgrimage medals, used only in times of illness or extreme misfortune. You wear one, he says, and say the right prayer, or cry a little, both work. Nearby, a boy trades his badge for a wooden toy sword. He grins like he's just won a duel. You find a corner bakery and swap a tiny badge shaped like a beehive for a loaf of something sweet and sticky. The baker nods approvingly. Saint Ambrose, patron of bees and baked goods. The world of badges, it turns out, is deeper than you imagined. They aren't just tokens of where you've been, they're invitations to be treated differently. A walking resume, a spiritual passport, or perhaps just a way to skip the line at the nicer soup cauldron. Later, you visit a small chapel off the square. Inside, a side altar is covered in pinned badges, hundreds of them, layered, rusted, bent, shining, forgotten. A sign encourages pilgrims to leave one in exchange for a prayer from the resident priest. You press your hand to your pouch and think. In a quiet moment, you remove the fish badge. St. Christopher's alleged pet, remember? It never felt quite yours. You place it gently among the others. A soft wind stirs the candle smoke. Someone whispers a prayer behind you. The room smells of old wood and wax and the faintest trace of honey. Outside, the town bustles. Children run between carts. A woman calls out the price of apples. Someone plays a lute with only 3 working strings. You rejoin your group at the fountain. Agnes has acquired a new badge that looks like a pair of crossed sandals. They were out of sheep, she shrugs. The monk has bartered his spoon badge for a small sack of almonds and a piece of parchment with a riddle on it. It's either a blessing or a joke, he says, but that's true of most things. You all sit a while, letting your legs rest and your cloaks dry in the sun. The dog is still with you. He's acquired a badge of his own, tied loosely around his neck. A bone, maybe? Or a particularly lumpy sausage? The Frenchman gives a toast using a borrowed cup. To badges, he says, and the many odd uses we find for them. You sip your drinks, warm, slightly vinegary, possibly stolen, but it's not bad. Back on the road, your little band sets off once more, feet lighter, packs heavier, and the dog trotting faithfully behind. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows that turn you all into slightly wobblier versions of yourselves. The monk insists it's a metaphor. The Frenchman insists it's a trick of the cheese he ate. You pass through a quieter stretch now, with gentle hills and the occasional crumbling milestone covered in ivy. The air smells of damp earth and sage, and the road is peppered with signs of those who've come before. Boot prints hardened in mud, scraps of ribbon tied to tree branches, and a half-buried badge glinting in the dust. You fish it out, a tiny lion, mouth open mid-roar. Agnes peers at it. Probably St. Jerome, she says. Or maybe someone just really liked cats. You clean it off and add it to your growing collection, the metal cool in your hand. There's something strangely comforting about it, this quiet archaeological treasure hunt along the way. You've started seeing the road itself as a living archive, less dusty and grand than a cathedral, but more honest somehow. As the day warms, conversation drifts toward the makers of all these strange and charming badges. After all, someone had to hammer them, mold them, shape their tiny details with care or, occasionally, with very little care at all. And so you begin to picture the badge workshops, those cramped corners of medieval towns and cities where molten lead was poured into carved molds, cooled, clipped, and sold from wooden counters. They called them pilgrim signs back then. Some were made hastily for the rush after Mass, others intricately detailed for noble clients who wouldn't dream of carrying something off-center. Historians still debate how standardized these badges really were. Some molds have been found with interchangeable parts, allowing craftsmen to tweak a saint's face, hand, or even animal companion depending on the customer. Others seem suspiciously similar from one shrine to the next, leading to theories of badge bootlegging. Yes, even in the 1300s, there were knockoffs. One badge maker in Paris allegedly produced over 50 variations of the Virgin Mary, depending on whether the buyer wanted her weeping, glancing upward, holding grapes, or definitely not holding grapes. The grapes were divisive, apparently. You pass a weathered cottage with a carved anvil sign above the door, long abandoned, but maybe once a badge maker's shop. You picture the scene, bellows hissing, molds clinking, a disgruntled apprentice spilling pewter on his foot. Over and over, they pour and cool, snip and polish, dozens a day. Saints, beasts, relics, strange hybrid icons that likely meant something to someone once. Some badges even carried inscriptions, tiny lines of Latin prayers, barely legible unless held to the light. Others bore inside jokes or local references, like the badge from a Flemish shrine shaped like a cabbage that locals swore protected against embarrassing sneezes during Mass. You're startled from your thoughts by a sudden clack behind you. The Frenchman has found a discarded wooden stamp and is now stamping dirt into his tunic for texture. You don't ask. Agnes, more practically, is sketching badge designs in a small notebook. "What do you think?" she asks, holding up one shaped like a boot with wings. "I'd buy it," you say. "Limited edition," she replies. The monk joins in, suggesting a badge shaped like a sleeping chicken. "To represent peaceful rest," he explains. "Or breakfast," the Frenchman adds. You pause for lunch by a stream, balancing bread and cheese on a flat rock and sharing dried apples while Saint Biscuit chases butterflies and nearly falls in twice. The light filters through the trees in soft gold, and you imagine badge makers walking the same road centuries ago, lugging molds and tools from town to town, setting up stalls at fairs and feasts. Some would have been skilled artisans, others just clever opportunists with a melting pan and a vague understanding of what a saint looked like. There's evidence that entire family workshops were built around badge making, mothers pouring metal while children affixed pins or loops. One recovered badge mold from Bruges even bore faint fingerprints permanently scorched into its side. You wonder if that badge still exists somewhere, quietly pinned to a cloak that hasn't moved in centuries. You take out your lion badge again, examining it more closely. The details are slightly uneven, the mane wavy on one side and missing entirely on the other. But it feels right somehow, like it was made quickly but with heart. You decide it was someone's first attempt, a badge apprentice's maiden voyage, and you're carrying it forward. The dog returns, muddy and pleased with himself. The monk offers him a piece of apple. The Frenchman offers him a blessing. Agnes offers him nothing, because he tried to eat her sketchbook. As you set off again, the road begins to slope downward, offering glimpses of farmland and small villages ahead. Smoke rises in soft spirals from distant chimneys, and somewhere in the air is the unmistakable smell of baking bread. Your cloak swings slightly as you walk, and the metal of your badges clinks gently, each one a tiny echo of a craftsman's hand, long gone but not forgotten. And in that rhythm, badge, step, breeze, you find yourself drifting again. Not quite dreaming, not quite waking, but definitely carrying a little bit of someone else's story. You round a bend and spot, in the middle of a grassy clearing, what appears to be a half-collapsed inn. The roof is listing like a drunk sailor, and the sign hangs upside down, swinging in the breeze. Still, it smells like stew, and there's music drifting from inside, something stringed, played very slowly, possibly with gloves on. You push open the warped wooden door and step into a room full of mismatched benches, half-asleep locals, and one extremely energetic old woman tending the fire. She waves you in before you can speak. "Pilgrims, you're late. I saved you a table." No one asks how she knows. The table in question is near the hearth, warm and smoky, and already set with bowls. You settle in, shedding your cloak like a snake abandoning its soggy skin. The monk flops into a chair with a theatrical groan. Agnes immediately begins bartering with the woman over whether she'll trade stew for a badge shaped like a frying pan. The innkeeper, as it turns out, collects pilgrim badges, not to wear, but to hang. They dangle from the rafters like silvery bats. Hundreds of tiny metal pieces, each tied with thread or nailed into crooked beams. Some are oxidized green, others bright pewter, and a few shimmer gold in the firelight. It's like eating dinner under a constellation of saints. She gestures upward proudly. "Every one of those has a story," she says. "I forget most of them, of course, but they're good company." And that's when the conversation turns, slowly and inevitably, to the stories, the strange, slightly unbelievable, occasionally miraculous tales pilgrims used to tell about how they got their badges. Because to the outside world, a badge might be just a hunk of tin, but to its wearer, it might be proof of healing, or a token from a dream, or a thing they found under their bed one morning after promising to give up swearing. One man once claimed he received his badge from a talking goose. Another swore his badge had healed his mother's gout simply by sitting in her shoe overnight. The smell drove the illness out, he said, with a totally straight face. Historians still argue whether these tales were believed literally, or more as metaphorical comfort. Were they pious exaggerations, some innocent misunderstandings, or simply the medieval version of saying, "You won't believe how I got this scar"? There are recorded instances of pilgrims claiming badges appeared on their cloaks overnight, a sign that their journey had already been spiritually accepted, even if their feet hadn't touched the road yet. Others told of badges glowing in the dark, repelling thieves, or whistling softly during storms. You sip your stew and look up again at the rafters. One badge, shaped like a bird in flight, catches your eye. "That one," you say, nodding toward it. The innkeeper grins. That came from a Welshman who fell asleep on the road and dreamed of St. Kevin turning into a blackbird, woke up with that pinned to his tunic, swore it wasn't there before, swore on his teeth he didn't have many. Agnes chimes in. One woman in Flanders said her badge floated down a stream and landed in her soup she ate around it. The Frenchman, never to be outdone, tells of a relative who received a badge after sneezing 7 times in front of a statue of St. Apollonia. On the 7th sneeze, plink, it just appeared on the altar rail. You take out one of your own badges and turn it over in your fingers. For a moment, it feels heavier, more charged, like it's holding something. A memory that isn't yours, a promise from someone long gone. It's this mix of fact and fable that makes pilgrim badge stories so enduring. They were souvenirs, yes, but also relics, and sometimes confessions, a way to say, I was here, something happened, maybe not the thing I expected, but something. One popular tale tells of a man who wore a badge, shaped like St. Margaret's dragon, into battle, swearing it would protect him. He was promptly hit with a cabbage, survived though, and claimed the badge deflected it. Another badge, shaped like a hand with 2 fingers raised, was said to have kept a ship afloat during a violent storm when its owner held it up and shouted, "Not today." The badge was later bent by the wind but still considered powerful. The innkeeper tops off your drink with something fermented and winks. There's truth in the telling, she says, even if the truths had a few ales. You ask if she has a favorite. She thinks for a moment, then points to a badge near the corner. It's simple, just a boot print. Came from a boy who never reached the shrine, she says. Got sick halfway there, but he said the walk was holy enough. No one speaks for a while after that. The fire crackles, someone snores softly in the corner. A rooster outside starts crowing far too early for any sane bird. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment, your fingers still holding the cool, smooth edge of your lion badge. St. Biscuit settles at your feet, and for the first time in days, you feel no rush, just the stories hanging above you, old and absurd and a little beautiful. Morning spills in sideways through the warped windows of the inn, turning the floorboards into gold-striped mosaics. The innkeeper is already up, clattering around with a kettle and scolding a chicken that appears to be living inside the pantry. You rise slowly, the way bread might, feeling more baked than rested, but not in a bad way. St. Biscuit is licking the monk's ear. The monk, still dreaming, seems to believe it's divine intervention. Outside, the air is wet with dew and quiet in that sacred just before people start talking way. You tighten your cloak, brush badge crumbs off your tunic, and rejoin the others as they stretch and yawn and debate whether it's too early to eat cheese. Today's stretch of road follows the banks of a wide river, smooth and sleepy, reflecting clouds like slow-moving sheep. You walk beside it, boots squelching softly in the muddy verge, while Agnes sketches reeds, and the Frenchman composes a ballad entirely in rhymed complaints. Your mind drifts again to badges, not just the ones you found or bought or squinted at in rafters, but to what they meant once the pilgrim returned home, because as strange as it sounds, the badge often outlived the pilgrimage, and in some ways, it outlived the pilgrim too. Back home, in villages hundreds of miles away from the shrines, those tiny, misshapen bits of lead and pewter became holy stand-ins. They were pressed into bread dough to bless it, hung in stables to keep the livestock healthy, slipped beneath sick pillows, or tucked into that one drawer where you keep things you're not sure you'll need, but definitely don't want to lose. In some cases, badges were even placed in coffins, tucked near the hands or pinned to the shroud, so the dead would carry their pilgrimage with them. One archaeologist found a badge buried in a child's grave, shaped like a little house, maybe representing a saint's shrine or heaven itself. Historians still debate the origin. Was it a treasured gift or just a leftover trinket? Either way, it stayed with that child for centuries, quiet and unassuming beneath the earth. Back on the riverbank, you stop for a break near a cluster of stones shaped like chairs by time and weather. Someone's carved initials into one. The monk suggests a prayer, the Frenchman suggests breakfast. You do both. Agnes, picking bits of moss from her boots, points out that in some regions, badges weren't just sacred, they were legal proof. Completing a pilgrimage could fulfill a court sentence or religious penance. In those cases, the badge was your receipt, your literal get-out-of-jail card, stamped in metal. Imagine forgetting it at home, she muses, trying to explain that to a bishop. And indeed, some records exist of pilgrims carrying letters of authentication along with their badges, in case anyone doubted they'd really gone the distance. One Italian pilgrim reportedly wore his badge chained to his belt, like a trophy. "Would you like to see my indulgence?" he'd ask, probably too often. There's something touching about that. The idea that a journey could be measured not in days or distance, but in a single, fragile emblem, a fragment of metal, a story you could hold. You look down at your own growing collection, each one clinking against the others like coins in a beggar's bowl. Some are shiny, some are dull. One is definitely shaped like a fish, though no one can agree what kind. The road narrows as the river veers left, and you follow a footpath worn by centuries of sandals, boots, and wishful thinking. The terrain rises slightly, offering a view of a thatched village in the distance, a cluster of rooftops, chimneys, and, yes, what appears to be a roadside shrine. You pick up your pace. The shrine is small, stone-framed, half-covered in ivy, and blessed with a very cross-looking wooden saint inside. His hand is raised in what might be a blessing or might be a vague threat. A handful of offerings rest on the ledge, a few copper coins, a dried flower, a painted rock, and of course, a badge. This one is circular, worn smooth, but you can just make out the image. A fish leaping from a chalice, the monk gasps. "Saint Corbinian," he says, reverent. "No," says Agnes, squinting. "That's a carp." The Frenchman adds helpfully, "Definitely a salmon, possibly undercooked." You leave behind a small token of your own, a badge shaped like a tiny boot tied to a ribbon, and whisper something you're not quite ready to say aloud. It feels silly. It also feels right. As you turn away, a breeze tugs at your cloak. The badges jingle gently, soft and unhurried, almost like applause. Lunch is a crust of bread shared under a crooked oak. The dog steals half of it. You pretend not to notice. Later, walking in the dappled light of the woods, you think about how many badges still lie out there, buried in fields, sunk in rivers, resting in the forgotten corners of old barns, not lost, just waiting. And maybe, long after you're gone, someone will find one of yours and wonder. Afternoon sunlight slants through the trees as the road narrows into what can only be described as an enthusiastic suggestion of a path. Roots curl up like fingers, rocks litter the way like mislaid relics, and the forest on either side presses close, the air thick with the smell of pine and the distant whisper of birds that probably have opinions. You trudge along, feeling your boots grow steadily more philosophical about the meaning of damp. The monk mutters prayers. Agnes hums what might be a drinking song in reverse. Saint Biscuit chases a butterfly and immediately regrets it. This is the part of the journey they don't put on the badges, the in-between, the part where your muscles protest, your brain wanders, and you begin to question whether you've made a terrible life choice. Still, there's something about this quiet, badgeless stretch that feels important. Like the universe is telling you, not every step needs to be marked. Some are just for getting you somewhere. And yet even here in the silence of moss and mud, the idea of the badge still lingers, because in medieval times, badges weren't always about shrines. Some commemorated the journey itself. These were known as non-shrine badges, and they were delightfully weird. There were badges made for guild events, mystery plays, river festivals, and, yes, even tournaments. Some featured mythical creatures. Others were shaped like hands, hearts, or riddles. One infamous badge simply bore the image of a man blowing a trumpet out of his rear end. It's in a museum now. Scholars stare at it thoughtfully. Children laugh. Historians still argue whether it was satire or just very enthusiastic plumbing humor. Some of these secular badges were worn with pride. Others, like badges from romantic entanglements or failed crusades, were quietly retired to the backs of drawers or melted down and recast as something less incriminating. You step carefully over a log and spot something glinting just beneath the leaves. Curious, you crouch and brush it aside. No badge, sadly, just a bit of foil from someone's lunch. Agnes, seeing your interest, shares the story of a Flemish merchant who had a custom badge made not to honor a saint, but to commemorate the fact that he had survived a particularly dull council meeting without falling asleep. It featured a yawning lion. He wore it to the next meeting and was promptly not invited to the one after that. Nearby, the Frenchman recalls that in 15th century Paris, one group of apprentices gifted their retiring master a badge shaped like a sausage to thank him for long hours and generous breakfasts. The badge had a loop at the top so it could be worn as a necklace, but the master reportedly used it as a spoon rest instead, and even these oddball badges mattered. Because in a world where most people had little control over their stories, where literacy was rare and time was precious, badges let you leave a mark, a shape, a memory that didn't need words. Historians believe some of the more abstract designs, knots, loops, layered circles, were symbolic maps of the pilgrim's journey, personalized to show where they'd been and what they'd learned. Others may have been in jokes, spiritual metaphors, or simply the medieval equivalent of, I went on pilgrimage and all I got was this lumpy pewter sheep. You pause at a clearing where someone's built a small bench out of twisted branches and stones. It's surprisingly comfortable in the way that only very old things can be. You sit for a while, badges clinking softly as you shift, and listen to the forest breathe. Saint Biscuit curls at your feet. The monk snores quietly, face tilted to the sun. Agnes sketches a thistle. The Frenchman composes a love poem to his socks, which he insists have achieved sainthood, and you, well, you just breathe. Because even here, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dirt and drowsy bees, you're still on pilgrimage. And somewhere out there, someone's hammering out a tiny badge shaped like a starfish, or a pickle, or a donkey in spectacles, and getting it ready for the next tired soul who stumbles in and says, "I need something to remember this by." Eventually, you rise. The path continues. You follow it. Later, as the trees thin and the scent of wild garlic gives way to fresh-cut hay, you pass a small farmhouse with a shrine on its porch. Tacked to the wood above it are 5 badges, weathered by sun and rain. One's a scallop shell, one's a tiny barrel, one is mysteriously a goat in a hat. You leave a coin and a smile. The badges shimmer in the late light, old but not forgotten. That night, as you camp under a crescent moon with the smell of nettle tea in the air, you polish one of your badges absent-mindedly with your sleeve. You think about the ones you've yet to find, the stories you've yet to collect, the nonsense you'll one day tell about this walk, and maybe, just maybe, you'll have a badge made, your own design, maybe a pair of muddy boots with wings, or a dog with a saintly halo made of cheese. Something absurd and true. You'll wear it on your cloak, you'll carry it home, and one day someone will ask, "What's that?" And you'll say, "Oh, that's a story." Dawn rises behind your eyelids, gold-tipped and suspiciously loud, thanks to a rooster that clearly thinks he's auditioning for a cathedral bell tower. You roll over in your cloak, which now smells faintly of nettle tea and campfire, and groan softly into the moss. Saint Biscuit is already up and conducting an energetic chase with a moth that may or may not be imaginary. Breakfast is modest, yesterday's bread with the optimism scraped off, but the view is astonishing. A gentle valley stretches out below, quilted in mist and drowsy cattle. Somewhere down there lies a town you've heard about in at least 4 wildly conflicting stories. One says the wine is divine, another warns that the innkeeper is a werewolf, a third insists it's where St. Ursula once sneezed and accidentally blessed a goat. You're going there, of course, but before you reach it, you're due to pass a crossroads shrine, one of the older ones, built of stacked stone, moss-furred, and leaning slightly like a pilgrim who's had one too many ales. Shrines at crossroads were common in medieval Europe, especially along pilgrimage routes, and many were dedicated to local saints whose names have long since tumbled out of collective memory like marbles from a cracked jar. This particular shrine, according to your monkish companion, is rumored to contain a rare type of badge, not from a far-off shrine, but locally forged and distributed by the villagers themselves. Not just souvenirs, but stories, pressed in pewter. As you reach the crossroads, a light drizzle begins to mist the air, coating everything in silver. The shrine appears almost like a ghost out of the fog, short, round, with a little iron gate and a bell rope, so frayed it looks like it's been chewed by time. Hanging just beneath the carved lintel is what looks like a collection of tokens, some rusted, some newer, all strange. Agnes leans close to inspect one shaped like a tiny broom. "Which badge?" she suggests. "Saint Sweepingus," the Frenchman intones, deadpan. The monk chuckles and corrects him. It's probably a badge tied to a local festival honoring domestic saints or seasonal traditions. In some towns, badges were created not for spiritual journeys, but to mark the yearly rhythms of life. Harvest, fertility, flood, fire, birth, burial. These were communal emblems, not personal ones. One badge here appears to be shaped like a ladder wrapped in ivy, perhaps referencing a legend or miracle now lost to time. Another features 2 fish kissing beneath a crown. Could be wedding related, the monk shrugs, or a reference to a local myth. Historians still debate whether these obscure badges were strictly devotional or sometimes part of secular pageantry, civic pride in pewter form. You remember something Agnes said earlier, that badges weren't always bought. They were also gifted, passed from hand to hand, a way of saying, I walked this path, and now you can carry part of it too. Here at the crossroads, a few of the badges dangle on cords, inviting touch. Pilgrims press their fingers to them, like worry stones. You do too. The metal is cold, slightly pitted, smooth from centuries of anxious hope. The monk says some of these may be community relics, non-holy but still held sacred. A badge made by a village blacksmith might gain meaning not through miracles, but simply through memory. Every year, it's rehung, re-blessed, re-believed in. You wonder if one day a badge you're carrying will end up like this: forgotten, then rediscovered, studied, misunderstood, hung somewhere strange with a little placard reading, origin uncertain. Further along the path, the rain picks up a little, and you pass a tiny wayside shelter, just enough to huddle under. Inside is a carved beam with notches gouged into it. The monk explains, it was once used to measure height, or penance. Pilgrims might be asked to stand against the beam and vow to return with a badge from a particular shrine. If they did, they'd carve their own notch beside the last, a tally of faith, if you will. The medieval version of Kilroy was here. You eat lunch there, a bit of cheese, a lot of rainwater, and Agnes digs out a parchment with some sketches she's been working on. They're badge designs, modern and ridiculous. One shows a cow juggling eggs, another is just a boot with a halo. You should make one, she says, nudging you. Start a new tradition. Because that's the thing about these badges. They weren't just relics, they were living language. And language, like roads, gets built by walking. The Frenchman tells a story about a town where the mayor, centuries ago, began awarding badges of excellent loafing. People wore them like medals. One even made its way into a cathedral treasury by accident, or so the story goes. As you rejoin the trail and leave the shelter behind, you start to notice the symbols people have carved into the trees. Tiny crosses, arrows, initials, a kind of living graffiti trail, markings to say, I was here, I believed, I got lost, I found this stream, I left a biscuit, I'll come back. One carving shows a hand holding a feather, another is a stylized snail with a crown, probably jokes, but perhaps prayers too. By evening, the town comes into view. It's smaller than expected, perched between two hills and ringed with hedgerows. There's smoke curling from a handful of chimneys and the faint chime of a blacksmith's hammer. You spot the inn's paint peeling, roof patched with enthusiasm, but little skill. The sign reads, The Quiet Donkey. The donkey on the sign is mid-bray. Inside, the fire's warm, the bed's suspiciously lumpy, and the stew contains something that may have once lived in a pond. You fall into bed with the weight of the day still hanging from your shoulders and your badge cord. You dream of ladders wrapped in ivy, of kissing fish, of pewter goats in silly hats. And when you wake, the badges are still there, still clinking, still quietly telling the world, you walked here, you mattered, you're part of this. The next morning arrives with an overzealous sunrise and a rooster who has clearly not gotten the memo that it's your rest day. You groan and burrow deeper into the inn's scratchy blanket, which smells faintly of sage, onions, and something you hope was just a spilled stew. Outside, the village is already alive. Chickens dart through muddy lanes like feathery projectiles. Children chase a hoop down a hill, the smith hammers something confidently metallic, and from a far corner of the square, you hear the telltale jingle of, "Yes, badges." You emerge slowly, cloak wrapped around you like a reluctant burrito, and shuffle out into the light. Agnes is already there, perched on a bench with a slice of bread and something pickled. She nods toward a stall near the market fountain, the badge seller. It's a rickety table stacked high with pins, brooches, cords, tokens, and tiny stamped wonders. Some are displayed on squares of faded cloth, others hang from a wooden rod, like particularly devout laundry. The badge seller is a woman in her 60s, her hands as calloused as the path you've walked, and her eyes just as knowing. She doesn't hawk her wares. She just waits. You lean in to look. The badges here aren't from famous shrines. There's no Canterbury cross or Santiago shell. These are local, homemade, and gloriously odd. One features a dancing radish, another a sheep carrying a scroll. There's a badge shaped like an ear with a crown above it. Agnes pokes that one and whispers, "Probably a saint of eavesdropping." You smile and pick up a badge shaped like a crescent moon with feet. The metal is worn but lovingly cast, and on the back, scratched in tiny letters, is what looks like a name, Marta. The badge seller watches you. "That one walked to Rome and back," she says, pinned to a girl who lost her voice. She sang when she returned. You don't ask whether it's true. You just nod, because in the world of badges, stories and truths tend to hold hands and wear the same hat. This is where badge culture really sings, at the human scale, not just at cathedrals or crossroads, but in these little towns where local legends and odd miracles spawn their own sacred souvenirs. Pilgrims didn't just collect badges, they traded them, gifted them, even gambled them. In some inns, you could pay for a meal with a rare badge. In others, you might win one in a riddle contest. The Frenchman shows you a coin-sized token stamped with a frog on a throne. "Found it in a boot," he says proudly. "No idea what it means. Possibly cursed." You ask the badge seller about the strangest badge she's ever seen. She doesn't hesitate. A three-legged cat with a bishop's mitre. Don't ask. Scholars still debate whether such fantastical badge designs were satirical, symbolic, or simply the result of one too many fermented plums. Some suggest they were mementos from passion plays or carnival seasons. Others argue they were subtle forms of protest, badges worn sideways or upside down to indicate dissent. A medieval shrug in metal form. You buy the moon with feet badge. The seller wraps it in soft linen and tucks in a bit of dried lavender for the road, she says. You nod, tucking it into your satchel next to a crust of bread, a half-drawn map, and 3 pebbles you swear you had a reason for keeping. Later, you explore the town. There's a small church with a relic that's either the finger of a minor saint or a slightly holy turnip. It's hard to tell. The locals treat it with reverence either way. A few more badges are pinned to a worn velvet board beside the altar. A swan, a windmill, a pie. The monk tells you these small-town badges rarely make it into collections or museums. Many are lost to time, but the ones that remain are precious, precisely because they're so personal. They weren't meant for history, they were meant for someone. You sit beneath an awning as the rain rolls in, watching as townsfolk bustle between shops and booths, badges glinting faintly on cloaks and belts. Some are fresh, shiny, and proud. Others are nearly worn smooth, like river stones. You wonder how many stories they carry, how many footsteps they've counted. In one corner of the square, a group of children huddle around a teacher who hands each of them a badge with a little acorn on it. To remember your first journey, she says. Not a shrine, not a miracle, just a walk, just a memory. And that's when you realize badges didn't just mark holy sites, they marked moments, a laugh, a lesson, a long afternoon where nothing happened except that you were alive and moving and trying. That evening, back at the inn, you string the new badge beside the others on your cord. They don't jingle, they whisper. Each one is a chapter, a strange pewter bookmark in the novel of this wandering life. You fall asleep with the scent of lavender in the air and dreams filled with dancing radishes and three-legged cats who sing psalms in Latin. You wake to the smell of something gently burning, not the building, thank heavens, just breakfast, or what a very optimistic innkeeper is calling breakfast. A puck of bread freed to near geological hardness, and an egg that could double as a projectile. Still, it's warm, it's vaguely food-shaped, and you're grateful. Pilgrimage has a way of refining your expectations downward until you're ecstatic, just to have a place to sit and something to chew. As you gnaw politely at the crust, you glance again at your badge cord. You've now collected enough that it jangles when you walk, quietly, like wind chimes in the back of your memory. They hang in no particular order, like a museum curated by someone who fell asleep halfway through organizing it. Agnes eyes your collection. You'll need a second cord soon, she says, or a very patient donkey to carry them all. You think she might be right, and it makes you wonder, what did medieval pilgrims do when they had too many badges? The monk, who's busy scribbling notes in the corner, perks up when you ask. Some stitched them into hats or cloaks, he says. Others mounted them on small boards, portable reliquaries, really. He pauses, dipping his quill, and some were buried with them. There's a stillness at the table, like the air leaning in to listen. Burial with badges wasn't common, but it wasn't rare either. In a few uncovered graves, especially in northern France and southern England, archaeologists have found badges pinned near the shoulders or chest, often tarnished, sometimes warped by soil, but unmistakably there, a last whisper of devotion, or perhaps a final bit of traveler's flair. One grave, discovered near a crumbled priory, contained a woman with over 40 badges, all stitched into her cloak in a neat, symmetrical pattern. No one knows her name, but her cloak tells you she walked far, believed deeply, and collected stories like seashells. Historians still argue whether this was an act of faith, an attempt to be spiritually armored in death, or just a personal choice. Maybe she loved the way they caught the light. Maybe she liked the weight of her memories pressing gently against her chest. After breakfast, you wander the village again and find a chapel tucked into a hillside, its roof green with moss and its door hanging slightly ajar. Inside is dim and cool. Dust motes float like lazy stars. There's no priest, no choir, just a stone altar and a wooden bench. And on the far wall, a panel of small metal shapes, carefully arranged. Not crosses or saints, but badges, or what's left of them, rusted outlines, fractured crescents, twisted icons. Some have been nailed directly into the wood, others are tied with thread. One has a scrap of parchment still clinging to it, the ink faded into illegibility. Agnes reads the plaque below. Offerings left by pilgrims, some over 500 years old. This isn't a famous shrine, no relics, no indulgences, just a quiet place and a wall that remembers. You sit for a while, listening to the chapel creak in the breeze. Somewhere outside, a bell rings, a faint and cracked. You wonder how many people came through this room over the centuries, badge cords jangling, feet blistered, prayers half-formed and hopeful. Some probably came in joy, others in grief. All of them left something behind. It makes you think about your own badges again, the ones that feel silly now, like the frog on a flute or the one shaped like a spoon, but at the time, they seemed like jokes. But now they're breadcrumbs, markers on your strange and winding path, proof that you noticed, that you were paying attention. Later, as you prepare to leave the village, a young boy rushes up and offers you a crude little badge made of clay. It's barely dry, thumb-pressed and wobbly, but clearly meant to be a sheep, or a cloud, or maybe a mitten. "For your road," he says, grinning. You smile, press a coin into his hand, and add the badge to your cord without hesitation. It's not silver or pewter. It's not holy or official, but it's perfect. Because by now you understand, it was never just about the badges. It was about what they marked, the quiet moments, the strange encounters, the side quests, the shared laughter over dinner, the aching feet, the missed turns, the unexpected kindness of strangers. You glance at the Frenchman who is currently arguing with a goat, then at Agnes, who is carefully oiling her boots with what smells suspiciously like duck fat, and you think, this is what I want to remember. As you step back onto the trail, the wind picks up slightly. Your badge cord flutters and clicks gently, as if applauding your choice. You walk on. The next stretch of your journey is quieter. The road runs through thick, whispering woods, where sunlight filters in thin slices, dappling the path in gold and shadow. Birds call out lazily above, their songs punctuated now and then by the soft thud of your boots against the mossy trail. No one's in a rush. Even the trees seem to lean a little slower here. You travel in single file, a string of weary pilgrims strung along the trail like beads. Agnes walks ahead, occasionally whistling a tune you're convinced she invents as she goes. The Frenchman trails behind, muttering something about breadcrumbs and squirrels with judgmental eyes. And there you are, somewhere in the middle, cloak swishing gently with each step, your badge cord swinging in a rhythmic lull. The forest feels ancient, not in the storybook dragons and elves kind of way, but in that grounded, quiet kind of old, the kind that's seen crusades and coronations and 20 generations of birds nesting in the same crooked tree. It makes you think of time, not the urgent ticking kind, but the long, winding kind, the type of time that badges whisper about. You pause by a low stone wall, half swallowed by ivy. A small shrine sits there, just a weathered niche with a painted tile of the Virgin Mary, faded and chipped, but pinned beside it, astonishingly, is a badge, a real one, left recently. It's shaped like a goose. Agnes joins you, squinting at it. "That's a pilgrim badge of St. Werburgh," she says, as if this is a perfectly normal thing to know. She once resurrected a goose. Long story. You chuckle. Medieval saints did have a flair for the unexpected. One calmed dragons. Another argued with bees. St. Werburgh apparently saved poultry. You offer a quiet nod to the badge, unsure if it's a prayer, a thank you, or just an acknowledgement of the weirdness of this whole world. The Frenchman catches up and squints at the shrine. "That goose had excellent posture," he declares solemnly. The trail winds on, and you fall into step with a new pilgrim, an older man with a crooked staff and a cloak dyed the warm brown of walnut husks. He doesn't talk much, but he has badges. Oh, so many badges. You count at least 30, pinned in perfect vertical rows on the back of his cloak. Each is arranged with care: Canterbury, Rocamadour, Cologne, Sainte Maries de la Mer, and a handful you don't recognize at all. One looks like a fish inside a boot. You gesture to it, and the man smiles. Saint Blaise, he says, patron of sore throats, and fishermen and wool combers, bit of a multitasker. You walk quietly beside him, the soft jingle of his badges a kind of lullaby. He tells you that for some pilgrims, the journey became a lifelong thing. Some never returned home, others simply kept walking, from shrine to shrine, season after season. Sometimes, he says, I forget what I started praying for. That hits you in the chest, because you've started to forget too. Whatever compelled you to begin this journey, grief, maybe, or guilt, or just boredom wrapped in a spiritual excuse, it's faded into the background. What remains is the walk, the people, the rituals, the rhythm of daily life on the road, and the badges. That night, you camp by the edge of the forest. A fire crackles, sending lazy sparks into the evening sky. The monk reads quietly. Agnes polishes her dagger with exaggerated flair. The Frenchman is attempting to toast something vaguely edible on a stick. You're not sure if it's cheese or a very confused apple. You sit back and unroll your bedroll, the earth cool and fragrant beneath you. As you settle in, you thread a small new badge onto your cord, a modest scallop shell you bartered from the silent pilgrim in exchange for half a honey cake. It's light with a clean stamp, and you thread it beside the clay sheep badge the boy gave you. You notice how the scallop sits a little crooked. You decide not to fix it. Historians still argue whether badge arrangements had meaning, whether pilgrims grouped them by shrine, by miracle, by type. Some say it was deeply intentional. Others say it was a jumble, like a drawer of tangled keys. Maybe it was both. Maybe the way you arrange your badges says something about who you are. The fire dims, the sounds of the woods settle into their nighttime lull, leaves rustling like distant footsteps, owls calling out with bored authority, some tiny creature rustling in the bracken. Your badge cord lies beside you, catching the firelight in flickers. You fall asleep with one hand resting near it, as if to keep the memories from wandering off in the night. In the morning, the sun dapples your eyelids before your mind has fully caught up with your body. The forest feels different in the early light, less mysterious, more companionable. Trees that loomed like sentries last night now seem more like sleepy friends, stretching and yawning with the breeze. You pack up your bedroll with the muscle memory of someone who's done it far too many times. The badge cord jingles softly as you sling it over your shoulder, now so weighted that you think twice about swinging it too casually, lest you knock out a passing sparrow. Agnes is already awake, boiling water in a soot-blackened pot. She hands you a cup with what might generously be called tea, though it tastes mostly of bark and stubborn optimism. The monk joins you a few minutes later, humming tunelessly and carrying a notebook so stuffed with notes that it seems to sigh under its own weight. His ink-stained fingers twitch even while he drinks, as though already itching to scribble. Today, your path bends east toward a lesser-known shrine, hardly famous, rarely mentioned in most pilgrim guides, but beloved by those who know it, the shrine of Saint Melangel, a Welsh hermitess known for protecting hares from hunters, a woman so reclusive and serene that the very woodland creatures were said to trust her. Agnes seems charmed. Imagine being known as the Saint of Bunnies, she muses. I'd settle for Saint of Mild Discomforts. You set out again, and with each step, the woods give way to moorland. Heather dots the path, and the occasional sheep eyes you with the bored suspicion reserved for creatures that have seen every type of traveler trudge past. About an hour in, you pass another group of pilgrims going the other way. They look exhausted and radiant in that slightly delirious way that suggests they've just finished their journey and haven't yet processed the return to normal life. Their leader, a wiry man with sunburnt cheeks and a hat shaped like a collapsed mushroom, nods as you pass and says, "Blessings on your feet." It's a common phrase among pilgrims, but today it sticks with you because your feet are very much in need of blessing. You trudge on, occasionally stopping to admire wildflowers or pretend to tie your shoe so you can catch your breath. You notice more badges now, partly because your eyes are trained, and partly because the pilgrims you meet are more visibly adorned. One young woman wears a vest entirely quilted with fabric pouches, each one containing a tiny badge nestled in cloth. She opens one to show you a badge shaped like a comb. "Saint Lou," she says, "patron of hairdressers, also toothaches. Don't ask." You try not to, but she tells you anyway. Apparently, Saint Lou once healed a man who had both a splitting headache and a wicked case of split ends, or so the story goes. Historians still argue whether some of these dual saint stories were retrofitted, an attempt to broaden the appeal of minor shrines, or if they reflect the natural layering of local legends over generations. A saint starts out patron of one ailment, and by the 14th retelling, they're also guardian of bees, bakers, and bad in-laws. As the trail begins to climb, the moor opens into rocky outcrops. You pause for lunch beneath a craggy hill. A farmer passing with a donkey offers you a few walnuts and some dried figs in exchange for the last of your strong cheese. You agree readily. It was strong enough to walk away on its own anyway. You sit with your little meal, watching the wind bend the grass, and your badge cord sits across your knees like a strange, jangling vine. You count again. 32 badges now, some dented, some pristine, one faintly sticky for reasons you'd rather not investigate. You take time to polish a few, not with anything fancy, just a scrap of cloth and a bit of patience. The badges catch the sun like tiny mirrors, throwing back glints of past shrines and long-dead saints. You think about how, for all their religious purpose, these badges also had a kind of casual glamour. They were the souvenirs of a hard-won journey, a way of saying, "I was here, I walked, I believed, or at least I tried." It's strangely reassuring. As the afternoon stretches on, the road takes a sudden dip into a valley. The trail narrows and you pass a stone gate, half collapsed, marking the entrance to an old monastic route. Moss grows thick here, and the air takes on that cathedral stillness, the kind that hushes even the birds. The path becomes quieter. Your group speaks less now, as if something about this stretch invites reflection, or perhaps it's just that everyone is running out of witty comments about saints who banished fleas or calmed angry pigs. The Frenchman surprisingly breaks the silence. "I think my badges are gossiping when I sleep." You blink. "They jingle in different patterns," he continues, solemn, "like they are plotting against me, especially the snail-shaped one." You nod because, honestly, that checks out. The shrine of Saint Melangel, when you reach it, is nothing like the others. There's no bustling village, no cellars with buckets of dubious relics, just a low stone chapel tucked between two hills, wrapped in ivy and shadow, Inside, it's quiet. The floor creaks. A single beam of light falls on a carved stone slab that once marked the saint's resting place. A few badges rest nearby, left by others, humble and unsung. You add one of your own, a small, beaten badge shaped like a tree. You're not even sure where you got it, but it feels right. As you step back into the sunlight, your badge cord swings gently, catching the wind. You wonder what they'll say tonight when you dream. You leave the shrine of Saint Melangel in a reverent sort of silence, the kind that feels unspoken rather than imposed. The chapel disappears behind a bend, and you're once again swallowed by the landscape. Rolling hills, low stone walls, sheep bleating with the urgency of creatures who have no actual emergencies. Your feet are sore, but there's a gentle pride in that now. Each blister, each step, each badge, they're all little markers on a personal map that no one else can fully read. The badge cord around your neck is heavier than ever, but oddly comforting, like a very clunky scarf made by very determined saints. The monk walks beside you, humming some old pilgrim hymn in a minor key, the kind that sounds slightly off and haunting. You try to join in, but end up humming a completely different tune. The Frenchman joins a third tune altogether. It becomes a sort of dissonant harmony, like a choir composed of people who never agreed on which song they were singing. Agnes just rolls her eyes. The path widens again into a sun-drenched plain, and in the distance you spot a row of market tents, colorful, weather-stained, and surrounded by the slow shuffle of pilgrims milling about. You recognize the setup. This isn't a shrine proper, it's a badge fair. They pop up near popular crossroads or convergence routes, part marketplace, part gossip station, part spiritual trading post. Vendors shout in 5 different dialects. Badges are strung up like jewelry. Scallop shells, keys, swords, suns, footprints, roosters, even an entire tray of saints doing vaguely acrobatic things with their halos. A young boy runs past waving a banner with a goose on it, again with the geese. You browse idly, your badge cord tucked close, so no one tries to snatch a rare piece. Badge thievery isn't common, but it's not unheard of, particularly when someone gets their hands on an unusual or foreign design. At one stall, an elderly woman with a hat made from what appears to be several stitched together gloves gestures you over. Her wares are odd, many of them not badges at all, but fragments, bits of lead, broken clasps, and badges that have lost their defining features entirely. This one's a saint, she says, holding up a blob of metal, or a windmill, or a sleeping cow, depends on the angle. You buy it anyway. There's something comforting about carrying a badge whose story has been lost, a reminder that even forgotten things still deserve to be remembered, even if only as a shiny weight around your neck. You reunite with the others under a tree near the edge of the fairgrounds. The Frenchman has acquired 3 new badges and what might be a pie. He refuses to confirm its origin. The monk has a new parchment scroll poking out of his satchel, account of a 12th century miracle involving a talking turnip, he says, as though that explains anything. Agnes is chewing something that crunches alarmingly. As the group lounges in the sun, a traveling friar approaches. He's young, red-faced, with a wide grin and absolutely no badges, none at all. Naturally, you ask about it. He chuckles. I collect prayers, not lead. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs, more portable. He sits with you a while, sharing stories, some wild, some suspiciously embellished, a tale about a pilgrim whose badges glowed in the dark. Another about a woman who was healed not by the relics, but by laughing so hard at a saint-shaped badge that she forgot her pain. Historians still argue whether laughter has a place in pilgrimage. He says, grinning, "You think it does?" That night, you make camp near an old Roman road. The stones are cracked and half sunken into the soil, but they still whisper of empire and sandals and time's long parade. You sit on one of them as the sun sets, badge cord laid out beside you like a sleepy pet. Each badge catches the firelight differently. Some gleam, others glint dull and mysterious. One still smells faintly of onions, for reasons better left unexplored. You find yourself tracing their shapes with your fingers. There's the tiny horseshoe from Santiago, the square one with 3 towers from Cologne, the oddly well-endowed angel from that obscure Flemish shrine. You realize you've begun remembering not just where you got them, but how you felt when you did. You remember the muddy feet, the hot soup, the mispronounced Latin, the aching calves, the sudden joy of washing your face in cold river water. You remember laughter, embarrassment, relief, hope. That's the thing no one really tells you when you start collecting badges, that it's not about the saints or the miracles or even the shrines. It's about the walk, the people, the tiny moments stitched together by lead and time, and an aching desire to mark your place in the world. The stars come out slowly, each one bright and lonely and somehow perfectly placed. Agnes snores softly. The monk talks in his sleep about baked apples and heresy. The Frenchman has inexplicably tucked his badge cord into his shoe. You lie back on your blanket and watch the sky. The wind shifts, and your badges jingle just slightly, a lullaby in lead. Tomorrow, you'll keep walking. Tonight, you're just here, and that's enough. The road turns dusty by mid-morning, the air thick with the kind of warmth that makes your shoulders glow and your brain slow down just enough to start seeing faces in the clouds. You trail behind the others, badge cord tucked securely beneath your cloak, each step stirring up tiny puffs of earth that cling to your boots like sleepy memories. You've crossed fields, mountains, winding rivers, and markets so loud you still hear echoes in your ears. And now, as your journey begins to gently curve toward its eventual end, the landscape quiets down. It's as if the world knows you're nearing the final stretch and wants to make it easy on your legs and harder on your heart. A small village appears on the horizon, just a scattering of stone cottages and a church with a crooked steeple that leans like it's winking. There's a shrine here too, modest, not even one of the big-name sites, but they say it holds a miraculous toe bone of Saint Finger the Flat-Footed, patron of uneven terrain and mild ankle pain. You approach the shrine with a kind of ritual familiarity, wash hands, cross yourself, whisper a vague prayer, not quite sure who it's for. Then, as tradition demands, you leave a badge behind. You choose one shaped like a duck. No real reason. It just feels like the one most in need of a home. Inside the chapel, a local woman is sweeping the flagstones. She greets you like someone expecting company, but not entirely surprised when they show up covered in dust and carrying a half-dozen blisters. You chat a while. She tells you her husband once made badges out of clay, but they crumbled too easily. He moved on to spoons, she adds, so as if that explains everything. She asks to see your cord. You hand it over, and for a long moment, she studies each badge like a fortune teller reading the palm of your journey. "You've walked far," she says finally. You nod, "You have," and somehow you still smell faintly of onions. Outside, Agnes is negotiating with a baker over the price of a sweet bun that appears to be equal parts sugar and ambition. The monk is in deep discussion with a goat about theology. The Frenchman has acquired a new hat again. You sit beneath the eaves of the chapel and breathe. The air smells of rosemary and freshly baked bread. The badge cord rests across your lap, cool despite the sun. You don't count them this time. You just let them be. A young boy approaches shyly. "Are you a real pilgrim?" he asks. You smile. "I suppose so." "Can I touch your badges?" You nod, and he runs a finger along the laid shapes with the reverence usually reserved for dragon scales and treasure maps. "I'm going to collect badges one day," he says. You believe him? That evening, as the stars bloom across the sky, you and your companions gather for one last meal: bread, cheese, a dried fruit, and a bit of mystery meat. Someone insists is rabbit, though the texture leans more toward over-ambitious mushroom. The conversation drifts from tales of relics to improbable miracles to badge-swapping customs. The monk tells a story about a woman who traded her entire collection for a single badge shaped like a spoon, said it reminded her of home. Agnes raises an eyebrow. Or soup. You all laugh softly, the kind of laughter that doesn't demand energy but gives it. Later, as the fire dies down, you lie on your back and let the night hold you. The badges whisper beside you, bumping against each other in the breeze. Each one carries a moment, a memory, a miracle perhaps, or just a well-earned meal. Historians still argue whether badge collections were kept as sacred relics or simply fond souvenirs. Evidence of journeys survived, stories shared, paths walked with sore feet and open hearts. You don't need an answer. You have the badges. You drift towards sleep with the quiet certainty that your journey, like every pilgrim's, was a little strange, a little messy, and exactly right. Now, as your eyes begin to close, the wind down begins. You find yourself lying in the still hush of a chapel long emptied. The walls are cool and worn, like the inside of an old seashell, curved with silence. A single window throws soft moonlight across the floor, bathing the flagstones in silver. Outside, the world is quiet. No footsteps, no chatter. Just the hush of sleeping grass and the slow exhale of trees. You breathe deeper now, your muscles softening, your body sinking into the slow rhythms of rest. The badge cord is beside you, its weight now comforting, like a blanket threaded with memories. You reach out and let your fingers brush one last shape, unfamiliar but warm from the day's sun. The stories cling gently to you. A goose with a bell, a turnip sermon, a badge that glowed under starlight. Each one folds around you, like the pages of a favorite book you'll read again and again. Let the fire fade, let the night deepen. You have walked far, you have listened well. Let the journey rest now, and let your breath slow with it. The saints, the paths, the jingling souvenirs, they're all quiet now. All still, all part of the dream that follows. Sleep, gentle traveler, you've earned it. Good night.